Okay, we are live. Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's Vina, aka Miss WOC Reader. Welcome. If you're new here, remember to hit that like button. And I think we're going to have a really fun time today. I'm super excited to talk to today's guests. So I want to welcome the lovely Bethany Baptiste.
Hey y'all.
So,
So, oh, you want me to
so
introduce myself now?
yeah, go ahead and
Okay,
introduce yourself,
okay.
Bethany.
All right, okay. So, hi, my name is Bethany Baptiste. I am the author of The Poisons We Drink. I am a born and raised Floridian. I am a preschool inclusion specialist. So I work with children that are under the age of 5 with disabilities, and I love writing. I love writing kid lit. I love writing adult. I just love writing in general. So yeah, I hope that answers y'all's question. Oh, and I'm a Gemini. I'm a June. I'm a June Gemini. Oh, and I'm 32, and my favorite color is blue.
I see we have a couple of people trickling in. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. So yeah, that was a great introduction, Bethany. That kind of leads into like my first question. Just to keep it really simple. Since it's fall, are there any fall traditions that you partake in? I know you're in Florida, so you're not getting the cold weather like we are.
Yeah. So my fall traditions are more along the lines of like food. I love hot chocolate. So I will go out and I'll buy hot chocolate every once in a while because I don't drink coffee. I don't do that pumpkin spice stuff. I don't like that. But I will partake in chocolate. I love hot tea. I love mystery, even though I will read mystery books and thrillers like year round. This is kind of where I kind of like lock in and really sit down and get through my TBR because surprisingly enough, I don't read as much kid lit as I used to. In most of the stuff that I do read, it's either adult romance or mysteries and thrillers, and it's almost always more so mysteries and thrillers because I don't think I'm very smart, and I like being surprised. I like being surprised, trying to solve these mysteries, and I never get it right. So it's a lot of fun.
There's definitely an art to writing mystery because I took a mystery like course in college where we had to like learn how to write those 1 hour mysteries, and we like read a bunch of different mystery stories, and I'm like, shout out to you guys because I could not do it. I'm like, that has never been my calling.
That's why I respect mystery writers so much because to be able to just like constantly throw people off track, and have just suspects and clues and red herrings and plot twists and double plot twists and undoing the plot that you braided before. I mean, like, I'm always fascinated by it. I love cozy mysteries, but I love a good dark thriller as well. So I do love that, and I also I love watching murder mysteries, like Murder She Wrote. That's one of my shows. Murder She Wrote. I love watching Columbo. I just found out that there was a reboot of Madlock, and I was like, wait a
I
minute.
heard
So I
I
need to
did.
get back into that because I grew up watching Madlock. So yeah,
Yeah, those were my granny's shows. So like every time I see Murder She Wrote on TV, I think of her
I
because
love
she
it.
when she used to come visit us, she would be watching that every single day.
Yeah, and Jessica Fletcher, she kills me because like she will roll up on like a beach cruiser and be like, "I know what you did, bitch," and then ride off. And I just love. She's so badass to me. So yeah, I do love Murder She Wrote. I love murder documentaries a lot. Um, and I don't know. I've always just been fascinated by murder.
Is murder something you'd want to dabble in the future, writing
Um,
wise?
So I do have a murder mystery in mind. I think I've always been fascinated by murder because I actually, my family was impacted by a murder. My uncle was murdered when he was 15 years old, and it really affected my mom and her siblings. And it was a murder that was covered nationwide back in the 80s. And so I have a story idea that's inspired by his murder. And in it, I kind of want to also include like news clippings of his murder to just like preface like this is what this is going to be inspired by. So I have like that one little idea for a murder mystery. And I did have a middle grade mystery in mind. Trad Pub didn't like it very much, so I don't know if I'm going to proceed forward and like self-publish it or not. But I do have that in mind, and I do love that idea a lot. So I probably will self-publish it and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't come across like a lot of like middle grade mystery as much now. Like I would say as compared to before, because I grew up reading like the Mary Kate and Ashley series. You know, like they had a book series that was just mystery books. Like I think it was the New Adventures of Mary Kate and Ashley, where they'd be going all over the place solving crime.
Right. I grew up with that. I grew up with the Hardy Boys. I grew up with Nancy Drew. I grew up was it the Hardy Boys? Somebody correct me in the comments. It's been a while. But Nancy Drew, and then also Boxcar Kids.
Yes,
that had mysteries.
Yeah,
and they were very short and concise. And I do feel like middle grade nowadays doesn't have like those short and concise like chapter books a lot anymore. So I wish we kind of got back to that actually.
Yeah, because they were really great. Like, and that's what I remember going to the library and reading the Boxcar Children, the Mary Kate and Ashley ones. Like, there were a couple of other like these shorter series that I was picking up in middle grade. That, like, I pick up like 2 or 3 books a library visit, and then come back and get more.
They were very easy, and I also feel like they were more accessible. And
Yes.
like back in the day, there were so many of them. It wasn't like you know, a 3-book series or a 4-book
No,
series.
they were like 24, 30 books.
20, 30, 40, 50, 100.
Yes.
And like it didn't matter which book you picked up.
Yes,
like,
that's the part that was the best. You could read out of order.
Exactly. You could read out of order, because that's how I discovered like Boxcar Kids. I was reading them out of order. It didn't matter if I was reading book 66 or book 30. Like every story was very self-contained. And I did enjoy that a lot growing up as a kid, but you know, times have changed.
Yeah, like that's one thing I miss. Those, like, I wish they had more of just those self-contained or like chapter books for that age group, because the few that I find, like, the kids do seem to respond to them well, but it's just so hard to find them, and you're lucky if they go on for 4 or 5 books.
Yeah, and that is the sad part, but also it's just like the length of them. They were like very, very, very thin. And I mean, like, I'm not gonna lie, like the books like weren't printed in great quality, but they were accessible and cheap. And those were the key. Kids back then, they didn't mind paying, you know, a couple of dollars to buy multiple books for a part of this big, huge series. They were very easy to read through. They were very, they had like, you know, readability, you know, value. But I do think that, you know, in Kidlit, there is this thing where like publishers will sometimes treat book series like seasons. Like seasons, and or even, you know, movie trilogies or what have you. And even though I do love like, you know, plots within books and then like overarching plots, love that. But I do think that we should probably also try to get back to, yes, like Sweet Valley High. I love Sweet Valley High, and I loved the Babysitters Club growing up. Like, don't ask me no quiz questions about them, but I remember having
Mhm.
fond memories of those types of books. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like they were just fun, easy to read. The libraries carried them, so like even if you couldn't go and buy it at the bookstore, you could go into the library and just pick up one from the series, and you didn't have to read in order, so you could just pick up any one off the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very, very accurate. Um, and I know like we had that conversation a few maybe weeks ago where we were talking about, like, I was telling you about a book series that kind of got me into reading again, which was called Daughters of the Moon. And how, like, what Daughters of the Moon was considered, YA back then, but the length, the prose, and like the themes in the book would be considered middle grade now. And just like how everything has kind of shifted in regards
Mhm.
to like kidlit becoming more mature in certain ways.
Yeah, because I even noticed, like, when I think about it, back in the day, we were reading a lot of books like in elementary school that dealt with like girls who were a few ages older than us, like discovering like first crushes and navigating high school for the first time and things like that. And they don't aim those at middle grade at all anymore, at all.
Mhm.
Like it, if you have teens in your books now, it's just strictly considered YA. But I'm like, not all of these stories always fit into the YA.
Yeah. Like, I know, well, this would be considered why, but this
Yeah.
was my little series growing up. I loved Drama High, but like the pros nowadays for this would be considered more middle grade than it would YA. Now, don't get me wrong, Jade was getting into some mess.
She
She was
was. I read many of those from my library as well. I was telling people that like they're on Hoopla. If you want to go see what YA Black YA looked like back in the
Yeah.
day,
She
that's
was
a perfect example.
she was getting into some mess, but I love Drama High because that was just it was one of the only, it was like one of the only books out there at the time that just really resonated with me as a Black young reader. And it is very,
And
and then
she's an
also,
educator too. She wrote it specifically to
yeah.
get like it with intention to get that younger audience reading, that
Mhm.
younger Black audience, many of whom are living in the city.
Mhm. And that was the other thing, was having that hood rep. I
Yeah.
grew up in the hood, so having that hood rep was really, it was, what's the word I'm looking for? It was nurturing to the soul. It was nurturing to the soul because sometimes I do feel like there are, trad pup tends to pick up books where BIPOC or authors of color have to write stories where their characters have to navigate white only spaces, and there's a place for that
And
on
they were at
bookshelf.
white school there, but it was still hood.
Yes,
That's the thing. Like they
yes, they
went
were
to white
busting
school
in.
every day,
Yes,
but they had their own crew
yeah, they
of
had,
Black
yeah,
people. Like they mixed
that's
in
the
with the
key.
white kids when they needed to,
Yeah,
but they
that
had
was
their
the
own
key.
crew navigating that school, and they went to white school every day, but they're also, again, you're seeing that side of them in their neighborhood. And that
Hmm.
part resonated with me as somebody who lived like in the hood but was bussed into a white private school.
Yes, and that's another reason why I really enjoy Drama High. I really wish Kensington
I
really
missed when
got
they
back
had
into
teen
that.
books. Like I feel
And
like they dropped off doing teen books at the like right when we were starting to see things change. Like because I think they stopped their line in like 2014, and then there was the big push for these same types of stories after.
it was it, and
And they had quite a few series like that were pretty good that were going.
it's sad. It's really sad to see that. I mean, like, it is important that, you know there are so many more books out now that take these kids on adventures, compared to like back then where it was like strictly contemporary based settings. And even though I would argue, so church finger up, I would argue that Drama High to me is speculative fiction
Yeah, she was doing
because
magic and stuff in there.
yeah, there was like all types of like little magic stuff going on. People was having like
Yeah.
interpretive dreams and
Yeah,
all
she's
this.
doing her root work with her granny.
Yeah, so I would consider it speculative fiction, but to most people, because it was more of like an underlying thing that was happening, for most people, it would probably be considered contemporary. And it's interesting, as a Black author now to like look back at all of the greats and kind of like wonder like where are they now, because they wrote these books that like just shaped so much of a generation that was hungry for stories. And it's just like I would love for more of them to like pop back up and kind of like,
well, I know she's popping back up, but not in kid lit. I mean,
yeah.
she did a couple of self-pub Drama High books. I think she said like one more is still supposed to come, but she has an adult one that I think either came out already or should be coming out soon.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad because I feel like there is a lot of miseducation and misconceptions about existing in Black publishing. There is a lot of readers that may say, oh, well, this author over here is the first to do something, or this author over here is the first to do something. But in actuality, like we kind of forget the people that began it first. It's just that y'all started reading during a specific time. But those of us that are old and have gray hair,
those of us who will remember it, like if you were reading Black books in like the late 2000s, you remember
you
the Black books that were out
remember.
there.
And I mean, I will admit that that misconception also comes from the fact that like books like this are out of print. And there is that like Daughters of the Moon, even though Daughters of the Moon is not written by a Black person, but like Daughters of the Moon and like those types of stories that teens would probably really enjoy now, a lot of those are out of the print and they simply do not know that. And it's like we're losing recipes.
Yeah, that's like I've had that conversation before on Twitter, like where I said, a lot of these books are out of print, so people talk about them as if they don't exist. And it's not like anybody's collecting them like to keep track of them. Like I wish there was like a museum or something or some kind of project dedicated to like preserving this stuff.
Well, I mean, like I don't know how people feel. Don't jump me. Don't tussle with me in the comments, y'all. But I do know that for some of those like out of print books, like like the Sweet Valley High, like those in books that are like that, but not exactly that. I know that out of curiosity, I will look at like the Internet Archive and see what's going on. Just out of curiosity. Don't jump me now, because I know how some people feel about that Internet Archive, but it's you just finding missing recipes. That's it.
Yeah, like so with Drama High, at least it's still available as ebook, so you can still kind of buy it on Amazon or you can get it through. It's still out there a little bit, but it's not in print in people's faces where they realize like this existed. This was huge in the Black community. It was it sold well as a series.
Yes. And on top of that, there is another series, which I've recently found out that the author died. And like, so basically when I was a teenager, one of the first like Black fantasy books that were in YA that I found was a book called Bleeding Violet, which was by Adia Reeves. And it was like everything my little emo heart could want at the time. And it was very impactful on me to see a Black girl in a dark YA fantasy during like the surge of like YA fantasy, when you had like the Twilights, and you had Fallen, and you had Hush Hush, and
Yeah,
you
because people
had
forget in the Black community, up until recently, that shit was still kind of taboo. Like,
yeah.
we are, over for the most part, a very Christian people, so it was like, to get that devil stuff away.
No, and it was that book, Bleeding Violet. The cover was absolutely gorgeous because it was one of the first times that I had actually seen like a teenage Black girl on a book cover. And because normally at the time, traditional publishing would whitewash book covers that had Black characters on it, or they would put like a little object on it, and you had no idea like what it was or what it wasn't. But this was like one of the first times where it was like an unapologetically and like unambiguously Black girl was on a cover, and that kind of like resonated with me a lot. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I really Ronnie, hey Ronnie, I love
Yeah,
you.
somebody mentioned L.A. Banks. She was like monumental for her
Yes.
time as well, but since she's passed and her books aren't in print anymore, like, it's like people
Yeah.
don't acknowledge that she helped like make a spot for Black writers in fantasy today to publish.
Yes. And I loved LA Banks so much. And I think her daughter was working on books like in later parts of the series. I don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure her daughter kind of like picked up where she left off. And LA Banks, that was another powerhouse, because she would have been unstoppable if she had written a YA. I feel like she would have been really unstoppable, because like just her world building and just like how she infused like Blackness, and her supernatural world building was just like top tier, very very top tier. And then it was just like we got a Black Buffy. We got a Black Buffy, but it was still she was still unique and relatable to Black character. I mean, to Black folk. So, and that's kind of the other thing, where it's like, I do feel like Trad Pub really holds people back in regards to the types of stories that should be out there. I feel like white authors, they are given that permission and that grace to do things that other people simply do not have the permission to do. And because of that, I do feel like Trad Pub does a major disservice to Black authors in all age categories and genres. And I have so many friends that are currently like revising, editing books that are on contract, that are drafting books that aren't on contract, that are on submission, the overwhelmingly, there is just this level of frustration, where a lot of people just feel stuck. They feel stuck. It's a damned if you do, it's a damned if you don't. And like, and it's funny because it's like, as a Black author, like we can't even chase trends like other people chase trends, because like by the time Black folk actually like get the opportunity to like sit down and actually try to like tap into a trend, it's already okay, the market is overwhelmed. Oh, um we just feel like it's not gonna sell, because what we can see, these like 500 million white books over here, they're not selling. So your book is not going to sell, or we have fatigue, or what have you. Because for instance, perfect example is like romantasy. Even though romantasy was a thing even before like traditional publishing tapped in, and had been for a long time in indie publishing, there's Black authors right now that are trying to get into romantasy because, traditional publishing keep throwing like all this money at all of these other books, and they're being told we're already tired. How are you already
Part of the problem
tired?
too is that ad just chases trends too much. Like one thing hits, and then they want to immediately flood the market with a bunch of similar things as soon as possible, even if like it's not necessarily what like the same type of story that hit. They'll label it that, and then you go in reading that, and you're not able to. And you're like, oh no, that's nothing like this book that we enjoyed, and they're not able to recapture that feeling from people. So then they're ready to move on.
Yes, and I do feel, and we've talked about this before, off the record. We've talked about this before, but I do feel that as someone that grew up in the age of Twilight, that traditional publishing has been chasing that high ever since. Like anyone that like grew up like during the Twilight height, the height of Twilight, and then also before it, would know that like like books were being released, but they weren't like inciting madness and things like that. Like books were just there, they were just an option. And then Twilight happened, and it impacted like kidlit so much that even all of these years later, they're still trying to chase after that one book to set off a wave for another, for like for another trend. And
It's just not going to happen like the way the world is set up now. And also when Twilight hit, it started becoming very popular among adult readers, like specifically adult white women. And then they just started like making kidlit for the white adult woman as opposed to the kids it was before.
Yeah, finger snaps, Augustus bobbing.
Because they
yes.
like even showed stats of how the demographics changed a couple of years after Twilight to be more adult women reading YA versus the teens. Like back when it was just called, like it wasn't necessarily called YA, they used to just call them teen books, but it was the actual teens reading those books back in the day.
Yes, I do think that the adults that back then, they grew up like me in 2005, 2004, like that era of time with Twilight, they now, all of these years later, are taking the things that they saw as teen readers themselves and applying it to the books now. And I mean, like, it's working for them, but is it working for them because it's actually effective, or is it working for them because they're simply white? The world may never know. The world may never know. And they won't move like, and like more specifically for readers, like readers that are, there's nothing wrong with being an adult reader in kidlit spaces. The issue is that even back then, during the Twilight era, like teens were fighting for space with like Twi moms. I was there. I saw them. Twi moms were vicious. They were, I mean, like they were fighting kids on the internet. And on top of that, they were the ones that had all of the Twilight based websites. They were the moderators. They were everything. They controlled everything. Lusting at the kids. Yes, accurate. They control.
I always think of that scene in Living Violet where she like makes fun of like the Twilight moms, like they're at the bookstore and there's this really popular like Twilight parody book, and this grown ass woman comes to her teen self and is just like, oh, I'm looking for this book, and she's like, this woman is way too old to be looking for this book.
Yes. And it's and I feel like there's nothing wrong with reading the books. The issue is knowing your place inside of an age category that is not meant for you. And I think that's the bigger issue at hand here in kidlit as a whole, middle grade and YA, is that there are adults who are refusing to vacate the premises. Like, just be on the outside looking through the window and read the book and keep it moving. You don't have to be arguing with teenagers online. You don't have to be over talking children online. Those books are for them. They're for them. And I think that's very important to remember that kid lit is for kids. And I think that messaging has gotten lost because a lot of people who grew up during that kidlit boom in the early 2000s and the mid 2000s, they're readers, they're authors, and some of them work in traditional publishing. And so they have an expectation in mind on what kidlit should be. And when you have gatekeepers in place that have an idea of what kidlit should be, you are missing out on a whole treasure trove of BIPOC authors, of marginalized authors who have stories that simply do not fit that mold.
Definitely, because there's been some interesting books that I've read this year in kidlit where I'm just like, this wasn't for the kids. Because I have like my younger nieces and stuff that I read with. I'm like, this, a couple of times we've read books together and have just stared at each other awkwardly after. Like, weren't able to glean anything from it because you have publishers preferring these books that speak to adult readers, and you have these authors going in and they're trying to like, well, this really bothered me, so I'm going to tackle this in my book, but that's not necessarily something that this generation is struggling with as much.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. And I do think that, and it's being talked about in the chat, but I think to the larger point, because kidlit no longer feels like a safe space for kids, especially since right now we're in the middle of a nationwide literacy crisis. Every time I say that, people want to thwack me on Twitter, but I'm still gonna say it, bitch.
Oh, I've got thwacked on Facebook for it, for saying it.
Like, we're literally in the middle of a crisis. And so, like, kidlit doesn't feel safe for a lot of kids for a lot of different reasons. And because of that, they're either pivoting to adult, or they are pivoting to comic books, mangas. They're pivoting to graphic novels. They're pivoting to those, like, the visual side of things to get those needs met. And that is something that is to be said. And the kids are telling y'all, but instead of like people being like, oh, like, why are all these kids like fleeing and going to different mediums than the written medium? People are just like, oh, well, more books for the other kids that we were already writing for. And that should not be the case, because you should be writing books and you should be publishing books, traditional publishing. You should be publishing books to help the next group of kids, to get them
and that kind of feeds into what we talked about with the shorter books too. Like, my 11-year-old niece does sports on the weekends, so Saturday and Sunday she's busy all day with her sports most of the time, and like, she does soccer, she does swimming, she does basketball, and then now you have, she barely has time to read on the weekend. During the weekday, they're in school most of the day. You come home, you do your homework, and then you just have but so much time. So they don't have time to read these long books. And people are like, well, it doesn't matter if they read a book for 1 to 2 months, but let's think about it. If you're reading a book for 1 to 2 months, do you really remember most of what you read by the end?
I mean, like, and that's the other thing is, like, I will say that growing up, it was common to read books over a longer period of time, even books that you enjoyed. But we not them. You have people making decisions in kidlit that are 1 to 2 generations removed from the kids that are reading, or supposed to be reading kidlit. Like, we got to understand that these kids move different. These kids are built different. I was a teacher. I taught public school, inner city, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. And let me tell you, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, them kids are built different.
Yeah, I used to volunteer in inner city public school with that same age range. So
They're built different. And I also did tutoring for third grade, fourth graders, fifth graders, and sixth graders, and middle schoolers. And once again, those kids are built different. Like, and I think people need to. And so when you hear conversations about like, it is important to write stories that you wanted to see as a child, like write those stories. But during the editing process, you need to keep in mind that even though you wrote this story that you wanted to see as a child back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, the audience that you're writing for think you're old and decrepit. They think you're old and decrepit. And so you have to write for them. You have to write for them. And that's important. That's important. Like, write that story that's of your heart. But during the editing process, you need to keep your demographic in mind. Gotta remember that.
So what ended up like making you want to get into writing? Was there like a book? Was it just because you were seeing a lack of stories for Black children?
So, like, what made me get into writing was when I was growing up, back when we had TiVo, girl. I came home from one day. I think it was in fourth grade. I came home one day and there was the TiVo, and like it had some episodes of an anime called Inuyasha. Never heard of Inuyasha. Sat down, started watching. I was like, wow, okay, this is it right here. And so I became so obsessed with Inuyasha that I went on to my little AOL on the little family computer that was in the living room. Do y'all remember when family computers was in the living room? Do y'all
Ours
remember
wasn't
that?
in the living room. We had a TV. We had a room in our house specifically to like everybody could watch TV, and that wasn't the living room. It was like the second TV in the household.
Mm-hmm. We used to have, first it would be in the living room, and then we had a computer room. And like, give me a thumbs up if y'all remember that. I don't know. But like, I would dial in that little AOL.com. And do y'all remember when we would be on AOL.com? And do y'all remember like if somebody picked up the phone, all hell would break loose? Y'all remember that? Fights were had.
Yeah, that's when I was getting into soap operas too around that time. And the soap opera fandoms was something else too.
Yeah, the soap opera. Yes. And so but yeah, so I went on my little computer and I started typing in Inuyasha, and I came across the world of fan fiction. I was on fanfiction.net, became absolutely obsessed with like, wow. So I get to watch the TV show, and then I get to go on the internet and see what people are doing with these characters. Like, that fascinated my little mind. And so I started reading, and then I started writing my own little fan fiction. And like, so from elementary school through middle school, I was writing my own little Inuyasha fan fiction, girl. And then like, once I got into high school, I became very ill. I had chronic illnesses. I was having surgeries. I started failing high school. And after I had my final surgery, I went to my parents and I was like, okay, y'all, look, I'm failing. And my teachers, my school just did not give a damn about my chronic illnesses. I had doctor's notes. I had to take medicine. I was always falling asleep in class. I was in a lot of pain, and they just did not care. And I was like, look, if you want me to repeat my junior year, then let me stay in school. But if not, I really want to get a GED. And so my parents were military. And so, it was very much like like goal oriented. You have to do this. You need to follow this. Like, very, very strict. And like, that was the one time where I was just in so much pain that they were like, okay, we'll let you get your GED. I dropped out of high school. I was 16. I was still in my first semester of my junior year. And that same day, I enrolled in a GED class. So when I enrolled in a GED class, my day shifted because I did GED at night in a little elementary computer lab with like a whole bunch of old people that were getting their GEDs. And when I was talking to them, like I was just very fascinated by like their stories about how like they like sacrificed a lot when they were growing up, and now they're going back to get a GED for themselves. And I became like so fascinated by that I started thinking about original characters and not just anime characters and movie characters and stuff like that. And so because I had the days to myself, I started writing. I started writing original fiction, and I moved away from anime. It was terrifying because it was like I did not see those types. I didn't see Black characters on bookshelves like that. Like, yes, we had contemporary, but I did not see like the fantasies and the adventures and all of that. And so I was scared because I thought that I did not have it in me to create those worlds, because when you're writing fan fiction, the characters in the world is already there. All you do is just moving them around like they're little Barbie dolls. And so like that's where it started, like 16 years old. And I started writing adult romance. I started writing over the years I started writing like middle grade, and like The Poisons We Drink was actually the first YA that I actually like wrote to completion. And I started writing it in 2017. And I had written like middle grades and all that stuff like that. I tried to get into traditional publishing a lot earlier than 2017. I had written a middle grade. It was a Black boy middle grade book that had like aliens and government conspiracies, like everything that I loved, about like science fiction. And I was told, hell no. And so like I was just very depressed. I left writing like kid lit and started focusing on like adult again. And then like Trump won, and I was like, that's fucked up. And so like in the summer of 2017, like I was watching like Practical Magic, and that's one of my favorite movies. And I just loved this idea of like sisterhood, but then also love potions. And so I came up with this idea where it was like, okay, well, what if someone could like brew love potions where you could fall in love with an idea and you could poison politicians, and that kind of just spiraled from there, because I hadn't seen anyone like do love potions like that back in 2017. And it took me 2 years to write it. And then like when I went to query it in 2019, the fall of 2019, I was told no. A lot of agents were very uncomfortable because Venus and the gang was doing a lot of stuff. They was poisoning politicians. They was burning cops at stake. They was getting rowdy. They was getting bowdy. They was knucking and bucking, and they were absolutely terrified. So I kept getting rejections, and I walked away in December of 2019. And then like we all know what happened in 2020. And then people were coming to me and be like, The Poisons We Drank, like it reminds me of like what's happening like right now with the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. And they kept encouraging me to query it again. And I was like, well, a few months ago when I queried it, traditional publishing said hell no. So why would I query it again? Like, especially like in the middle of what's happening now. And funnily enough, like in June 2020, it was Pit Mad. I did a pitch contest. The pitch did very, very well. It got like over 1,000 like likes and stuff like that. Not entirely from agents and editors and stuff like that, but it got a lot of likes. I got 3 offers. I picked an agent, and all of a sudden, like traditional publishing didn't mind Black folk, burning cops at stakes and poisoning politicians, because it was cool now. And I think that comes to like, it comes to show that when you write Black books, like traditional publishing is so fickle. You can't always take what they say as absolute. You can write a story and be told that I don't know how to sell this, but the translation really is I don't know editors who would that I normally go to who would be willing to buy this. It's not that the book isn't sellable, right? And when you hear publishers say, we don't think that there's an audience for this, you have to keep in mind the audience that they have in mind. It doesn't matter if you're Black, it doesn't matter if you're a person of color or what have you. The audience that they have in mind will always be white people at the forefront. It doesn't matter if your story wasn't written for white folk. That is what they have in mind. When you have a whole bunch of white people at the table during acquisitions, do you really think, wow, Black people are really going to love this book? Hell no. That's not what they're thinking about. That's not what they're thinking about. And I need people to understand that. They're not thinking about, yes, like Black kids are going to love this. No, they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, will white people like it? And then they give you money based on how they feel white people will be receptive to it. How do I know that? It's because when you look at marketing, when you look at advertising, when you look, like once the book is bought and you look at the edit letters you receive and you look at the copy, you look what the copy editor is saying, you're looking at what the past pages, proofreaders say. When you're looking at all of these people who are touching the book before the book even gets on the shelves, they always move with a white-centric focus in mind every time. And you either clap back and risk backlash, or you stay silent because you don't want to be seen as problematic. You don't want to rock the boat. Even a gentle request, even something simple can feel like you are asking the world of people who are supposed to help you get that book on the shelf and into the hands of your audience. And constantly you have to talk to people who are, and remind them, like, this book is for my audience, not the audience that y'all think. Don't put my book on in a little little advertisement with no Taylor Swift. These are hood kids. Don't be putting my little book in a little Instagram post with some Taylor Swift song to it saying this reminds me of Taylor Swift. This book ain't got nothing to do with Taylor Swift. Or just
the way your book is packaged, because we've talked about it a lot recently with them taking cues from Barnes & Noble. They will change your cover based off of what Barnes & Noble says, and your book won't even be in Barnes & Noble. And the thing to remember is that majority of people don't buy their books from Barnes & Noble. They buy their books from Amazon, Walmart, and Target largely, and then Barnes & Noble after, as well as like the other indie bookstores and stuff. So that's something too important to keep in mind. Barnes & Noble is not in the inner cities and the Black neighborhoods. That's not where you'll find those stores. Those kids are more likely to get their books from Walmart and Target, but when you go into Walmart and Target, a lot of times the stories for them are not there on the shelves.
Right. I would like to clarify though that like they did not put The Poisons We Drink in a little Taylor Swift, because they already knew. They already knew I was too much of a nigga for them behind the scenes. They already knew. I was like, if you gonna put my little book in anything, it better be Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, Flo Milli. But do you see that? Think about it. Do you see when we talk about Black books and we talk about like social media advertising? Do you see them? Do you really see them? Wow, this book reminds me of a Beyonce song. This book reminds me of a this song, or even a Mariah Carey song. You don't see that. It's always like white pop stars. And like, don't get me wrong, I like white pop stars, but if you got hood characters that are nucking and bucking all over the place, what's Taylor Swift got to do with it? Like,
and then like sometimes our books don't fit into the aesthetics of being a reader as well, which is also a thing. I've talked about it before. There's certain publishers that I look at their social media, and it's more about the aesthetics of being a reader versus promoting some of the actual books. And there are plenty of books I've seen by Black authors. They're lucky if they get one post during their release year on their publisher's specific social media.
I'll never understand it. Like, I'll never understand.
And I do the
buying
surveys for like at least one of them, and I'd never see like any changes to their content.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, if you have a template and if it works, it works. But the thing about it is like when you use white centric like social media posts and stuff like that for books that aren't white, you're further proving who the audience you're really trying to gear towards. And sadly, the audience that you're trying to gear towards, they rely on that word that BIPOC authors can't stand, and that's connect. I can't connect to this book. I can't connect to this character. I can't connect to this. I can't connect to that. And yet, BIPOC readers learned to find other ways to enjoy a story that did not require connecting in with a character. And I feel like to the larger point, it's this, I don't like this idea of you have to like slide into the skin of a character in order to, don't make me laugh, Ronnie, but trying to slide into like the skin of a character and wear it like a fursuit in order to understand that character. Like, you're telling
Yeah,
me
that's not how I read, and that's actually just not in general how Black people tell stories. It's not.
exactly. And it's like you're telling me that you can't find one thing that makes that character relatable, but y'all connecting to blue, like to blue aliens and werewolves and mer people. You can connect to them and be serious. You can connect to supernatural creatures in ET, but you can't but connect to a Black character or a BIPOC character. Make it make sense. Make it make sense to me. That's why I'm like, I just don't believe this I can't connect thing. Y'all can connect to dragon shifters. You don't even like lizards. Y'all can connect to dragon shifters, but you can't connect to Black folk. Let that sink in for a second.
It's the truth. And it's even harder when you're a Black author who is writing like what people would consider hood characters. They're not going to be able to connect with you. And the sad part is some of our own people aren't going to be able to connect either, because like people are trained to read a certain way. You grow up reading white books that feature a certain type of white character. That's how you learn to kind of read and focus on those types of characters. And then you want to see more Black stories similar to that and be similar to the experience you grew up in. So if you get hit with something different, like you kind of have to remove your personal biases out of the equation.
And that's true, but I would also like to say that when it comes to Black stories, there's no grace given when it comes to certain themes in character struggles and circumstances. For instance, people can relate to a white character in poverty, living in a trailer park or living in a cabin somewhere, or their parent drinks or does drugs, or they're in and out of prison, and there's gun violence, and they can understand that from like a white character perspective. Now take that same character, that same backstory, and make that character Black, and now we talking about Black pain, and now we talking about Black struggle, and now we talking about this, and now we talking about that. But if the character was white, you would not fix your mouth to say that. You would eat it up. You would eat it up like cookies and cream ice cream. But the moment you take that same character and make them Black, all of a sudden it's, I can't read this. This is trauma. This is triggering. So it leads me to wonder, congregation, why is it that we can accept and empathize with white characters and their struggles, but take those same struggles and apply it to Black characters, and all of a sudden we've got an issue with it?
And it's
I
just
want to
because we've
know.
been spending so many years being told that that image is bad, and we see it in the news, like you see stories after story after story. It gets like fear mongering people, like, this is what's happening in the Black community. This is bad. This is why it needs to change. This is why we need to send more police in, and this and that. And you have people who didn't grow up in those communities. They don't see the other side of it, that it's more than just the violence.
It is, and it's something that I just feel like it just it I feel like it puts like the Black book community and like the Black writing community in a, not a sticky situation, but like a quicksand type situation. Because when you give relevancy to those negative stereotypes about quote unquote Black struggles, Black pain, Black trauma, but it's not that with white characters, and y'all pick up those same books, I mean, like, what it just shows, it's a lot of self-hate going on. It's a lot of self-hate going on, whether people realize it or not. And maybe just, I don't know. I do think that because of that, there are, how we react to those things and the misconceptions and the negative stereotypes that we like are applying onto ourselves. White traditional publishing sees that. White traditional publishing sees that. They take cues. So if we're writing books that rely on self-hating ourselves, well, guess what? Them white folk in traditional publishing, they hate you too. So now you got two people. You got somebody that's self-hating, and you got somebody white that's hating. And now together, you're putting books out into the world that reaffirms that. That's toxic, because the bigger issue is that those types of books aren't showing up in adult. They're showing up in kidlit. The kids are reading it. And that's the bigger issue that I have as an educator, is that people want to explore and unpack all their little self-hate and stuff like that in books for children. Children shouldn't unpack it with a therapist. Unpack it with a therapist. Do not put that on our kids. Do not put that on our kids. And that's that on that.
And those books end up on the bestseller list. And then they tell kids who actually usually can't even finish reading those books that they should be reading those books. Because it's not exactly like those books are accessible. They tend to be long. They tend to have upper vocabulary.
I think it's interesting to see what traditional publishing views as important stories to tell for BIPOC. And it paints, it puts a lens on how they view us. And I think that, I think that's something that definitely people should really think about. Yeah. And I also think that like BIPOC books, and more specifically Black books, are often used as tools to teach white people empathy.
Yes.
And humanize Black folk. And it's just like, I just want to like write an entertaining like story, that it's not to teach you that Black people are humans. Like that, it's not to teach you. Like, why do white people get all of the fun, entertaining, stories, but then even if you as a BIPOC author write a story with the intention to entertain, it's got to have like some little biblical lesson to it. It has to have some type of little civil lesson to it. Why can't you just read it?
Yeah,
I don't understand. Why can't you just read it?
yeah, I think people know right now the fastest way to trigger me lately is if you come at me with a natural hair book. Because when you're trying to find Black picture books right now, you have to sift through so many. And like I've showed you like the blogs that track those books, and month after month, week after week, we're getting so many books aimed at like love your hair, and it's just only focused on our hair and skin in a way that almost makes you feel like inferior, like what's wrong with like hair, like hair should be hair. But
And I
then
just,
you don't see like the same books like as far as like a fun adventure story.
I feel like it's in regards to like skin and hair, those books, as someone who reading picture books all day, that was what I did. I taught little kids. That's all I ever did was read damn picture books. And so, and I taught Black kids. I can tell you that like growing up, there was a lot of hate when it came to like skin and hair, but like we are quite a few years, we're like almost like 20 years into like natural hair movement, hair love, all of that jazz. And so parents like Gen X and millennial parents have done a really good job in having kids like love their hair and love their skin. I do feel like a lot of people are writing picture books based on what they wanted to see when they were kids. But I feel like when it comes to Black kids, I could be wrong. The kids that I was teaching, there was no question or no issue. Now, granted, if you are a Black child in an all white environment, could be different. Could be there could be that okay. But when we constantly publish those books, like we have to think about like who is this book for? Is it for all kids, or do you only have one specific type of child in mind? And like when you think about it from like a statistic standpoint, are there enough of that child to justify constantly making books about appearances? When I feel like kids nowadays, a lot of them, they don't really, they really embrace Blackness.
Yeah,
And
my little 6-year-old niece, she be schooling us all the time on Blackness. Like she's a trip.
I mean, I see Black kids every day, whether it's on the internet or not. And I have yet to see in this day and age, like I'm not seeing a lot of kids who hate how they look, who hate their hair. Black parents do a pretty good job at when it comes to making sure that the kids' hair, they get their little haircuts, they get their little braids, make sure and grease them kids' faces, please. Especially in the fall. Grease the faces, please, in the elbows and the elbows. Just a little bit of Vaseline. It goes a long way. Y'all should know this by now. I'm specifically talking to millennials, not Gen X. They normally do pretty good about that. But yeah, I do feel like it's been passed down. We're like several generations after, like based on back in the day, like they would make fun of hair. They would make fun of skin. They would make fun of features, but that was like 2 generations ago. That was Gen X and that was millennials. We're now in Gen Alpha. So that's like 2 to 3 generations later. It happened just like that. I'm sorry to admit, but we old.
Yeah,
We're
because
old.
when you think about it, it's probably been like about 10 years since you heard somebody say the word nappy like it was nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like there was some self-hating going on, like even back then. Oh yeah, black folk, black kids, they were ruthless when I was growing up and making fun of how your hair looked and this and that and the fifth. And so like I feel like a lot of people have that trauma, though valid, it's latched on. And so when you think about, this is a book that I really wanted to see when I was a kid, though valid, you have to ask yourself, are we still having that problem like widespread today for black kids? Like there's a place for those books, but those are the books that for a lot of publishers, like it's like, okay, well, we picked our one little Negro book, little Negro picture book for the season, so that's it. We don't want to see the kids riding no dragons. We don't want to see the kids swimming with manatees. We don't want to see the kids being wizards, and we don't want none of that. We got our little Negro book right here for the day, and that's it. And that's what they use.
Yeah,
That's
and
what
it's
they
very
use.
interesting when you see their key selling points. That's one of the things I do find interesting about Edelweiss. When you look at their catalogs and you see the books they're offering, and then you look at the key selling points, the stuff that it has written as the key selling point, it's like, really?
Well, you know who was writing those. Like there's no black hands on stuff like that. When it comes to that. And so that lets you know that you know who the audience, who the buying, who has the buying power when it comes to those selling points. And you know how I feel about it is, you know, if you're gonna write the books that you write, get your coin. But also just keep in mind who is going to end up with the book. See, I've told you this before. I have a philosophy that if you are an author, a black author that gets a whole bunch of money, I have a take your money and run type philosophy. Like take the money and run, rob them. Rob traditional publishing. Like yes, do it. Love, like absolutely. Take the money from them. I
You also
genuinely
do
believe
need to
that.
think about, though, are you going to be able to stand by what you wrote as an author? Because I don't know about other people's families, but if I wrote some questionable stuff in a book and my family read it, like it would be a conversation and they would not be happy.
I mean, it kind of just depends. It kind of depends on what you feel is important. I'm not gonna lie. Like, if traditional publisher had threw a whole bunch of money at me, I would have took the money and ran. But that's not what happened. And that and that was the path that traditional publishing, you know, did. But it is important to keep true to yourself. But you know, I do understand why, you know, some people, you know, you have to do what you have to do. But I do feel like one thing that I'm starting to notice by talking with other black authors, especially during like these little contracts, is like I feel like back in the day, like book contracts were very set up very differently, where books, like publishers had longer obligations in regards to printing the book, keeping the book on the shelves and things like that. Now I'm starting to hear, and it was even in some of my own contracts, that, you know, like if a book, you know, stops selling below a certain point, then it's automatically out of print. And so when we're writing these books, you have to ask yourself, are you the type that's going to take the money and run, or are you wanting your books to make it past 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Like, and that's my issue, is I feel like we're going to get to a point soon, because these contracts are kind of showing like, wow, if this book falls below a certain point, that they're just going to stop printing it altogether. Like, we're kind of losing um impact
Yeah, and
for
that's
new
a question I
kids.
had raised a couple of years ago too, and when everybody was talking about basically trying to insist they were writing a timeless classic, I'm like, okay, but let's start to think about, is your book going to be in print in the next 5 years?
It might be an ebook, but even now, like some contracts will say, like if like the print goes out of print, then it's considered out of print across the board, and then your rights get reverted back to you. Like that's kind of what I'm seeing for some things. Like I'm not an agent. I don't. Augusta, stop with it. Sorry, this hair is in my eyes. But I just feel like that's something to be mindful of. That traditional publishing is getting to the point where, like, we're making books now, but will they be staples like 5 years from now? Will they be in print 5 years from now? And it's already bad enough that, you know, Barnes and Nobles doesn't want to stock books. Yes, Augusta is the star. But like Barnes and Nobles doesn't want to stock books. And we were ringing the alarm back in 2022 that this was going to be an issue. And so because of that, traditional publishing, instead of using what's happening with Barnes and Noble as a warning or a sign to pivot, it's staying on course. It's staying on course, and now it's even harder as a Black author to break in, to sell books consistently. Like if your book isn't in the largest bookstore in the country, or it's only in a certain region in a country, that's gonna be an issue. Like I sometimes when I walk into a Barnes and Nobles, like everything is just so, there's not enough book space anymore. And there's not enough table space or end cap space anymore, because all I see is TikTok made me read it.
Well,
That's
my
all
thing
I
with Barnes and
see.
Noble is I don't shop there because they've actually never been in favor of Black books. Like even back in the day, that's the reason I got into ebook reading to begin with, was because I went into Barnes and Noble looking for specific books and they said order it online. Well, I ordered it online, found it on sale as an ebook on Amazon, and then that got me into reading Kindle books. Borders did have like a little bit more variety, but Barnes and Noble specifically has kind of never catered and carried Black books, and like they just haven't changed. Now they're throwing in the Black books in random spaces where you're lucky if you can even find them. They'll be on like the general fiction shelf all grouped together,
Yeah,
making it
it's
harder to even
harder.
see the few that are there. And more
Yeah.
importantly, more people still buy books from Walmart and Target. So I'm like, why aren't these agents, when they're doing these contract negotiations, focusing on getting these Black books into Walmart and Target?
I don't think that's something that an agent would have that much power. That a lot of that really boils down to whatever's happening in the sales and marketing department, or whoever's pitching it to these big box stores. I will say that
But maybe that's something that they should be looking into when they're negotiating their
I
contract.
I will say that because there is such an emphasis on physical copies, and it's hard for physical copies of Black books to end up on shelves. Traditional publishing has kind of like tricked people's minds into thinking if your book isn't on a shelf, then it's going to fail. But the thing about it is like when it comes to physical copies and when it comes to paperback copies, and the traditional publishing authors in the chat, they know this. We make less on hardcovers, we make less on paperbacks than we do audiobooks and ebooks. We make less per sale. And traditional publishing has tricked us into thinking that if this book isn't in Barnes and Nobles, if this book isn't on the shelf in XYZ, then it's going to be a failure. But it would take more copies hardcover copies and paperback copies to earn out than it would if you pushed ebooks and audiobooks. And we're in a world where people largely prefer ebooks and audiobooks.
A lot of
Like,
folks sleep on the library and its impact, but as I was talking to a librarian just the other day who works in collection and development, they buy their ebooks at a higher price than the average person buys their ebooks at. And they don't get like special discounts. Like if they have to go back and order more, they still got to buy that book again at the same price. So they might have to buy like 35 copies to suit 100 and something people who are requesting a book for their library system. They have to go in and buy it at full price every single time.
And that's also like, if a publisher tells me, wow, it's not going to be in this book, this is not going to be in this store, this store, this store, and this store, I'm not going to get upset, because I'm like, okay, so basically it's hurting your bottom line, because more people prefer audiobooks, more people prefer ebooks, and I get what, like 20 to 25% per sale, as opposed to say 12% or 10% for a paperback or ebook. I mean, for a paperback or a hardcover. I mean, like, it's a no-brainer. And I feel like that's why people need to, I would recommend to authors, especially newer authors, push ebooks and audiobooks more.
Yeah, because like with the library too, they're not checking out just that one audiobook. They usually have multiple copies of the audiobook that they're lending. And they also are paying a higher amount of money to have it for a certain period of time. Because unlike when you and I buy an audiobook, we're just paying that one-time price, they are not. They're paying it for a certain period of time or a certain period of borrows, and then they have to re-up that contract. And even though technically none of us own audiobooks outright, because Audible can snatch that audiobook back from you at any time, you're still getting more from the library buying so many audiobooks for their patrons.
It's true. It's true. And I feel like it's one of those things where we kind of have to play a game. It's a numbers game. So if you're not going to push for my book to end up as physical copies in stores, then I got to find other ways. And it just so happens that the other ways are the ways that actually pay more. You get more out than you get more out of ebooks and audiobooks than you do paperback and hardcover. And that's something that should be said. And also, as we spoke about, like Barnes and Nobles and a lot of bookstores, they're not in marginalized areas like that. And so because of that, ebooks and audiobooks meet that accessibility piece. It meets that accessibility piece for those people, because I mean, I hate to say it, hardcovers are already expensive. You might as well just pay a few dollars more and have somebody read the book to you. You might as well just pay a little bit more and have somebody read the book to you.
Oh, especially if you have vision issues. Like my mom, she doesn't buy books because a lot of times they print them too small for her to read anyway. She gets the large print edition from the library, and those large print editions are like double the price sometimes. And they don't do them for all books.
It's true. I mean, like, and there's just other ways to get those sales that can still benefit you. It's just that publishers put so much stock in physical copies. They got people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, because, you know, Barnes and Noble's playing games, Books A Million playing games, Target playing games, Walmart playing games. Everybody's playing games, but they can't play games with audiobooks and ebooks. Those never run out. So you can sell and still make more money. So, I mean, I do feel like, you know, there's that. Yep. Not ebooks. Hardcovers are extremely expensive. As an educator,
and I just took a poll the other day from a publisher, where they were talking about deluxe editions, and child, they are trying to price some of those YA deluxe editions at $30 soon.
My philosophy as an educator is a child should be able to walk into a bookstore with a $20 bill and buy a book, one book or two books with those $20. No little extra, no 20, it's gonna be 20, 50. No, a child should be able to walk into a bookstore and buy one or two books, depending on what it is, whether it's two, and still, even if it's a little penny back and change. I genuinely believe that, because at that point, it's begged the question: if a child cannot buy the book, then the child is not the audience. If the child cannot buy the book, because growing up for me, and even now, because I was a teacher, the parents would be like, "Here's a $20 bill. Here's a $20 bill." Now, granted, I even with Scholastic Book Fair, there was a lot of tears with my first graders, second graders, or kindergartners. There were a lot of tears because parents would give the kid a $20 bill, and the kids, they would add it up just so that it was just right 20. But the parents forget to factor in the taxes. So now you got tears. Because it was 20, or it was 19, or it was 18, but with the taxes, it's really 20 something or 21 something. And so as parents, it is important to be like, you can't just give kids $20 anymore. You got to give them like 25 or 22 or $23 to account for taxes. But like, the taxes be throwing the kids off because parents don't have conversations about those taxes. You're right. $20 is the new $5. It is the new $5. But I do feel that when it comes to, it's even those picture books, like, why are we paying?
They're like $18.99. It, like, some of them are like $18.99, and you're getting like 30 pages.
Like, why are we? Some of these picture books are even. It was hard for me as a teacher for these picture books, and I would work really hard to like try to, wait till a book was on sale or whatever like that for the kids, or try to get used books or what have you. But picture books were expensive. And I just feel like when it comes to kid lit, when you keep upping the price, who is it for? If it's not for the kids, then you're telling me it's for adults. And that's an issue in itself.
Well, as we've seen recently, they've been putting some picture books and label them as adult crossover.
You know them designer breeds. Like, they'll take like a little Chihuahua, and they'll take like a little pug, and they call it a little Chihuahua and a pug, and they'll call it.
Yes, they are calling certain picture books now adult crossover.
That kind of reminds me of that.
And Bethany and I read one of them, and we're trying to, it definitely wasn't for kids, in our opinion.
It wasn't for kids. It was.
So they're right, it was for adults, but I don't know about what the crossover part they were talking about.
Weird. It was weird. The only picture book that I would consider crossover would be Go the Fuck to Sleep. That's the only picture book like that I can think of. I love that book. But it's a book called Go the Fuck to Sleep, or Please Go the Fuck to Sleep, or whatever like that. You got, if you go on YouTube, like, Samuel L. Jackson actually reads it. It's so good. Like, that's when I think of like a picture crossover book, that is what I think of. Go the Fuck to Sleep. And I think he wrote another one, but Go the Fuck to Sleep, that's what I think of. So I don't know. It's definitely, I feel like kids are being pushed out of kidlit by things that we've already talked about adults staying in that space, and then kids are getting pushed out price-wise as well. But then, speaking to the adults,
but then they presented the picture books, though. That was their problem. The book, they're now calling it adult crossover. When we read it, because we got to read it early, it wasn't being pushed at adults. Nothing in the marketing copy said anything about adult readers.
It was like a little educational picture
It was
book.
just an educational book.
But I do feel like there's like a large subset of adults in kidlit where they want to stay in kidlit and control kidlit because they don't want to read adult because they think adult is so vulgar. And they have these misconceptions, and it's like, you know what? I'm gonna pivot, right? I'm gonna pivot. It's gonna make it seem like I got ADHD or something. I probably do, but I'm gonna pivot for a second and say that I hate when people say, like, there's not enough of this book, there's not enough of this book, there's not enough of this book. We literally have whole Google. We literally have the power of Google. We have search engines at our fingertips that literally will give you thousands of books that'll meet the thing that you're seeking. The issue is that we've entered a culture where it's people want other people to tell them what to read. And so, you know, it's one thing to be a subscriber to a channel or an account or something like that, but you shouldn't need someone else to tell you what to read or go based off of that person that, you know, these are the only types of books that do this. And that's why everybody keep reading the same damn books, because everyone just keep repeating what somebody else told them. And so there's a whole world of books that exist. And if you go solely based off of, say, TikTok or Instagram, you would think that there's probably like 10 titles in the whole universe or 10 authors in the whole universe. If you go strictly off of social media, instead of typing in, you know, in Google and looking yourself. And looking yourself, and I don't understand that. I don't know. When I was growing up, let me know in the comments, y'all. When I was growing up, if I had a question, my mom would be like, "Ask Jeeves or Google it." She would say, "Ask Jeeves or Google it." Do they not say that anymore? Does
and
anybody?
Some people on Goodreads do make some really solid lists.
Yes. Like, but I just feel like gone are the days where, and it could be, you know, coming from an educator perspective, it also could be that because school systems have scaled back on teaching children informational science, and we used to have computer lab. We had to do research assignments on the computer. We had to we had that growing up. So the first thing that we went to wasn't the library, it was the internet, because we actually had assignments and things like that. We had computer classes. We had a computer science teacher. Like,
yes.
We had typing classes. That's how I learned how to type in middle school. I took typing class.
I was in computer class in school, and then my mom had Mavis Beacon because she was going back to community college, so we were all doing Mavis Beacon together.
Yeah, we would do, and that's the thing. We had that. We had like the little covers on the keyboard so you couldn't see. And I'm realizing that we don't have that anymore. We don't have those typing programs. We don't have the computer class where you have to do research or this or that. We don't have that kind of stuff anymore because it's just assumed the kids know. But I can tell you this much. Kids do not know how to type like that. They struggle with phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, sounding out words. It's gotten so bad, girl, that
we had research papers before college. The funny thing is, so I've always lived in an underfunded school district with like really, really bad test scores. So when we went to the VOTEC, it's like a group of people coming from the high school together. Some of them are like on all different levels learning wise, and our business teacher, she was like very like about you're going to do your work, whereas like some of the other shops kind of slacked off because she had a PhD, which a lot of people there did not have, and she was just like really trying to push us to do better because business is just like not an easy class.
Mm-hmm.
So she had taught a lot of people like how to learn how to research a paper, stuff they weren't learning at their regular high school. And at the end of the day, that was their only class. For some people, that was the only class that had an A in it.
And it is keeping firm on expectations, and that's the issue with some of these kids now. Because when I go on social media, girl, like growing up, when Gen X and millennials came up with their little abbreviations, the LMAO, the LOL, the TTFN, like we had a list. Mm-hmm. We learned that list. It was universal. Like it was agreed upon. This is the things that you go, girl, they just coming up with their own abbreviations now. Abbreviations that nobody even use. And you'll be sitting there like, what the hell does TG?
I'll be having to Google.
What does that even mean? And then you're guessing it. Like they can't and now don't get me wrong, I love the younger generations, but when you come up with abbreviations, we have to understand what it is. Just because you don't want to type it out doesn't mean that it warrants an abbreviation. Like, girl, don't even get me
Adults
started.
be doing that too, though, because I remember in the bank, some people would be putting notes on customers' account, and I'm like, what even did you mean here?
I was like, okay, so it was this girl's boyfriend was cheating on her, and like the side chick like messages her, and half of the text message was just an abbreviation. And so like everybody was like, what the fuck is going on? So then in the comments, she was like, oh, it means this. And I was like, you couldn't have typed out them 3 little words. Like you couldn't have typed out those words. Cause what is that even? It was like a whole confession in an abbreviation. And I was like, how did
ASL? I wouldn't even know what that meant. See,
it's crazy to me. And like, yes, Ladarian, don't get me started on that ASL, because when I saw that ASL in the beginning, and I was like, why are they saying age, sex, location? Why are they saying age, sex, location? What does that mean in this context? And then one of the kids was like, oh, it means as hell. Where is the H for hell? What does that mean?
Listen, I saw ASL and my mind went to ESL, and then I'm already on a different topic. So
I'm like, I don't see. This is why kids, we got to stop. Stop coming up with your own language. Stop coming up with your own abbreviations. It has to be a group norm. You don't just come up with your own abbreviations and we playing a game like it's damn like word cross. Like, stop. It was working. Just like it was what was it? IJOBL or something like that. I thought it was somebody's language. I thought it, because I was like, why is everybody saying IJOBL or something like what does that even mean? And so then somebody was like, it means I just bust out laughing. It means I just bust out laughing. And I was like, it's not a foreign word. That confused me.
They couldn't just say LOL.
I just felt like, why can't you just say LOL? Like, why can't it's shorter? I don't know. Maybe. And then somebody was like, see, you thinking like an old person. And I was like, okay, all right, man. Because it would be easier to type in LOL than IJOBL. That's 5 letters. That's 5 letters. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Like, you basically typing whole words now.
I was so confused because I was like, wow, like, okay. But
and I struggle enough with these book abbreviations. Some of these titles too in YA in the past year were way too long.
Right.
And I'm just like, how do you guys expect normal people, and by the normal people, I mean people like me who aren't chronically online, who aren't deep in the online book community, to remember these titles to then take back to a bookseller or a librarian or type into Amazon or whatever.
But I think that when it comes to like the abbreviations, like people be forgetting, like, you know, the reason why we had abbreviations for book titles to begin with is because the book was in the community for a long time, and we just got tired of saying this damn, you know, typing it out,
yes, everybody knew what book you were talking about already.
I do think that it's better to just pick one word from your title, like, you know, when, and I say poisons.
I say poisons too.
I say it's just easy. It's just easier to say that. But you know, I mean, like, I can't. Hey, if you want your own little abbreviation, but don't get upset if nobody know what the abbreviation is. That's the
like,
only issue.
But some of these, like yours, is not even as long as some of the other titles that I was seeing this past year, and like they were also having similar covers too. So that's also where it was getting confusing. Like, you can't go be like the purple book with the curly hair girl on it, and then like, because that would be multiple coming up with long titles.
I'm telling you, for those of you that are still in traditional publishing, God bless you, because I'm gone. I left. I signed my little contract. I am free. You know that meme of that white man that's like, he got his little chains and they broke. That's me. That's me. I'm gonna be self-publishing a book next year. It's not gonna be kid lit. It's not gonna be kid lit, y'all. But I am self-publishing a book next year.
I think you should be like, you would be a good person to talk to about the pre-orders specifically, because they are something that's pushed so heavily in traditional publishing, and there's a lot of misconceptions about that as well. Like, just, I know a lot of people say, oh well, if depending on where you order it, it doesn't count as a pre-order. There, like, if you buy the book, like if you see the book out in the wild and you buy it ahead of time, then it doesn't count. And that's the opposite of what you were told, correct?
No, yeah. So with the poisons we drink, for those that don't know, my book got pushed a whole bunch of times. Even before it was ready to get published, it got pushed a whole bunch of times. And so because of print issues, when it got closer, my book was supposed to, like, one of the last times it got pushed, it was supposed to be March 5th. And then I found out like a week and something before that there was a problem with print. So when the books entered the universe, because they were making copies and the copies were getting shipped, even though my publication date got pushed again to April, I still had hardcover books out on shelves in the United States. And so I was told that it doesn't matter if a book is out on shelf before the publication date, it just gets count as a pre-order, even if it's on shelves. And so, and sure enough, that's what it was. All the copies that were sold and were on shelves, they got counted as pre-orders, even though someone physically went into the store and bought the book, because the publication date changed. So sales don't just miraculously disappear. At least mine didn't. But sales,
well, I had heard that from other people who worked in the, like, at the publishers as well, saying like it really doesn't matter if your book is bought because they put it out on shelves early, because not all books they give specific instructions to have them out on release date. Some of them, like, you can see out a month before. Like, I know I saw one in Target. I had been I was going to read the arc, and I thought I missed the date because I'm like, oh shit, it's out already. And like the author was fine with it because she was getting the sale anyway.
Yeah, I think so. Basically, the issue with that misconception, I feel, I could be wrong, traditional published authors, let me know in the comments. But I think the issue is that, like, because there's this big push about first week sales. It's a big push about first week sales because a lot of the times first week sales is how people are able to get on like bestsellers lists and things like that. And so when it comes to people saying don't buy the book before the publication date, people think that that won't contribute to first week sales, but it'll contribute in like a different way, or it won't count. And that's not true. It's just going to count as pre-orders, because when I went to a book festival in Texas this year, my book was for sale everywhere I went before it officially came out. And so when I was speaking to the bookshop owners that ran the book festival, I think it was Teen Book Con. When I was talking to them, they were, and I think it was Blue Willow Books. But they were telling me, don't worry, we already talked to your publisher, and it's not that, like, the book is still going to sell. Like, we still have copies to sell, but it's how we report it. So bookstores apparently have to report the sales, and they held off on reporting the sales, so that on the day of publication or the week of publication, when they reported the sales, those counted as pre-orders to the book, even though they were bought, during the festival. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, because I've heard booksellers talk like briefly about how like they do have to go in and report the sales, and how when they go in to report the sales, there are certain books that are automatically dropping down because they're already pre-planned to be on the lists and stuff too. Like certain titles they have to type in, certain titles are already preloading.
I mean, like in the bestsellers list, that's a whole other ball of wax. That's a whole other ball of wax, I feel. But I mean, that's for a lot of people, that's their goal, is to end up, on a bestsellers list. And it's a dream. It's a dream that a lot of people want. Hell, it was, it was one of my dreams, and I was able to accomplish it. I became an indie bestseller, and like, I'm proud because of all the shit that happened prior to. I didn't think the book was going to list on anything, because there was just so many things for the rollout that happened, and that's why I had to cuss out the publisher, and that's why there was too much going on. And so, but I do feel like a lot of bestsellers lists are inherently stacked against BIPOC authors, especially Black authors. I do think that, because I feel like New York Times bestsellers lists, they get away with a lot. They get away with a lot because they're a curated list. But I do think that, like, traditional publishing puts a lot of stock in books hitting the bestsellers list, but there's lots of books that never hit the bestsellers list.
And they're selling more than the ones that did.
They sold a lot of books. There's
some
lots
that are
of
selling
books
more during that week than the ones that actually hit the list.
For a lot, in a lot of cases, yes. And that's why, like, nowadays there's very few bestseller lists that go strictly off of sales. New York Times bestsellers list doesn't go strictly off of sales. They go off of a whole bunch of other stuff. The USA Today list used to go strictly off of sales,
and then they brought it back, and it doesn't.
And from what I heard, it's very biased towards traditionally published authors as opposed to, indie published authors.
Yeah, but it doesn't count all ebooks anymore either.
Yeah, and it's funny because the New York Times bestsellers list used to do ebooks for Kidlit. They used to do ebooks for Kidlit. The only reason why I know that, and they also used to count ebooks for indie publishing. And the only reason why I know that is because back in the day, there was a book called Zenith. It was a YA book called Zenith. And what's the word I'm looking for? So they did a serial. So the like both authors, one author was like a very popular booktuber. This was like way back in the day. And then the other author was a popular like dystopian author. And so they decided to self-publish it as a serial. So they put out like the first 90 pages of Zenith, and it hit the bestsellers list simply off of those 90 pages, even though it wasn't a complete book. So by the time it got picked up by a publisher, I think it was Harlequin, got picked up by Harlequin. So by the time it became a full book, the book was already going to have like best-selling on it anyway, because it hit the bestsellers list. And so they started changing it, because for anyone that used to be like a romance reader, like way back in the day, like when Amazon was absolutely dominating romance, they used to count ebooks, romance ebooks from Amazon. And so that's why, like, if you read a lot of romance books nowadays, you will see like New York Times bestselling author from an author that used to self-publish. They hit the New York Times bestsellers list because they were selling more copies in romance as ebooks than traditionally published authors. And so they weren't having that. The industry wasn't having that. And so they stopped ebooks, self-published ebooks and stuff like that from hitting the bestsellers list for Amazon, not from Amazon, or any authors. And now you just have a whole bunch of authors who, have New York Times bestselling author, and it's because they sold more copies than romance authors, traditionally published romance authors. And it's interesting. New York Times, they change what they want. They change what they want, and that's why so many indie authors, they really relied on the USA Today list, because that was just like the next thing. And then also it's one of those things where it went purely based off of sales. And so that's why you see those best-selling authors, even though they might be like USA Today or what have you, in some cases, they were selling more copies than the authors that were on the New York Times bestsellers list, even though it says USA Today, and some people don't put merit or value into USA Today. It was, there was that, but they change stuff all the time to fit whatever the industry has got, going on. And that's a shame. That's a shame.
It is. And then there's just like, there's so many books that come out, people don't even realize they hit the list. Like they'll hit the list for debut week, and you didn't really see like a big hype around them as compared to other books, so you would just never know.
It's interesting. It's interesting. And that's why there's a lot of like mysteriousness surrounding the New York Times bestsellers list, specifically because they got sued by someone, because that person they were a self-published author that sold more books in a specific best-selling category than the people on the list, but he did not end up on the list. And so the New York Times bestsellers list in turn said, we don't go based off of numbers, we're a curated list. So it's like half and half of, okay, New York Times bestsellers list wants to be considered as like a source for, yes, these books sold like buku amounts of books, but then also you're a curated list. So it's interesting. They kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. And not that I'm saying that people who ended up on the list and didn't deserve it, because there's a lot of people that end up on the list and they had the sales to prove it. But it's harder as like an indie author to break in that way, because the New York Times bestsellers list simply won't look at your, and that's also how like like authors like Colleen Hoover and stuff like that, she was already selling copies before she became a traditionally published author, but she didn't end up on the list. So then she had to partner up with a publisher. The publisher distributed the books, and boop, that's how she was able to end up on the bestsellers list. So sometimes, it kind of just depends on how you take stock in having that bestseller title. There's a lot of bestsellers that don't have that title over their name. I'm mad at the people who made her famous. Like, I'm upset at you. But it is what it is.
Yeah, when we talk about things like accessibility as well, the industry has really been trying to do away with mass market paperback, and that is one way that gets books out there in an affordable way. And that's also been a way that a lot of Black romance authors have been able to hit the lists, through mass market paperback books.
In areas that are book deserts, one thing that you will have is, a lot of the times, because there are some people that live in food deserts too, but you will get books from Walmart, Target. You will get books from just your regular grocery store. They're right there when you're checking
Dollar
out.
General.
And then Dollar General, the dollar store, and then also pharmacies.
Yep, also, Rite Aid does have a bookshelf.
Yeah, they in some cases, gas stations. A lot of gas stations will sell books too. And so there's other ways to get the books out there. But one thing you will see in regards to, like, say, the grocery store or the pharmacy or the gas station or the dollar store or what have you, a lot of the books that are on the shelf, they are mass trade paperback books. And a lot of books don't get to that point. They either stay a hardcover, and then the next year or a few years down the line, they'll get a paperback, or they don't even get to the paperback stage. Because a lot of publishers, they're choosing not to even go that route because the hardcover didn't sell what they wanted it to sell.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I'm old enough to remember when a lot of Kid Lit came in mass market paperback too, both in like what we would consider now middle grade as well as YA. Yeah. YA romance in the late 2000s, a lot of it was in mass market paperback.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking because Second Chance, it says right here. It says trade paperback printing. Right there.
Yeah, I was about to say, I remember those coming in mass market paperback as well.
And do you remember when paperbacks used to be under $10? Because this is $9.95.
Yeah, I remember getting the mass market paperbacks for like on a good day, like on a really good sale, you were getting like 2 for $5 and stuff like that.
Not only is it $9.95, but it's also 228 pages long. Interesting. So yeah, I think that's an accessibility issue. But nowadays, I've seen paperbacks be only maybe $2 cheaper than the hardcover.
Mm-hmm.
So the hardcover is $18.99 and the paperback is $16.99. I've also seen ebooks be almost the exact same price, if not the exact same price as hardcovers, which is an issue for me. Because, like, if you're going to justify the cost of a hardcover, okay, but there is no reason as to why the ebook should be the exact same cost as the hardcover. There's no reason. And when I went to my publisher about that, because I saw that The Poisons We Drink, the ebook was $18.99, I was like, hold up, that don't even make sense to me. So I went to them and I asked, why is that $18.99? And so they were like, It's the retailers that drop the price, not the publisher. That's why when you see those $9.99 and the $4.99 and for the ebooks, that is the retailer. And I'm like, okay, so that's an issue because it shouldn't be $18.99 to begin with. It shouldn't, so they shouldn't have to cut it down because it's a completely different platform that does not require ink and paper and gas and paying truck drivers and it shouldn't go that far. Like and that's why a lot of people, it's like, well, hell, I might as well just pay for and maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point in having the prices so close together, or having the prices that are, what's the word I'm looking for? Or having the prices that are exactly identical to the physical copies. It's like, well, if these are the exact same, I might as well just buy the physical copy as opposed
Although in this economy nowadays, people are just like, I'm gonna just wait a month or two for the 99-cent sale.
And that's the other thing is, you might, some people, hell, I'm one of those people. Sometimes it's like books are expensive, and I'll just wait until it go to Ollie's.
That's another thing too. I've been telling people, like, I know everybody who doesn't have an Ollie's bargain outlet in your area, you're definitely missing out. Yeah. You're definitely missing out. Mm-hmm. I know in my area, that is where a lot of like these city kids would be getting their books from, because Ollie's, because they are a liquidator, they get the books that are overstocked at bookstores. They get the books from places that went out of business, and they are selling them at an extremely reduced rate. So lately, in the past couple of years, because it wasn't like that pre-pandemic, they've been getting a lot of the best sellers that everybody's talking about, like within the year that they're or two that they're published, and selling them for like between $2 and $5.
I mean, like I showed you that one time I went to Ollie's like recently, and it literally had like best-selling books that were published within the last year or two, marked down to like $2, $3, and you bet your behind I bought them. I bought them because books aren't cheap. Books are not cheap, and they were perfectly good books. And you know what? It's that I have gone to bargain bins and found books from authors I have never read, never heard of. And because I bought that book and because I read that book, anytime they had new material, I would go out and buy the next book. So how I feel about it is, I know some people feel ashamed or angry that their books might trickle down to bargain bins. That's how you find a whole new audience. And just consider it like a trial. You know, like you sign up for like a subscription on like Amazon, where you sign up for like a little channel and it's free or whatever like that. It's like a trial. You're reading the book, and it doesn't feel like a risk to you whether you like it or not. And because of that, you might earn a lifelong reader for your new books. And I feel like that's why it's like poor people always end up being out of the conversation when it comes to accessibility and the cost of books. And it's a big issue, because I'd rather someone go to a bargain bin and pay $3 for my book than just pirate it. I'd rather that than and I feel like it's about reaching readers. And I feel like publishing puts a lot of stock into reaching readers that can throw money at you, right then and there, when it's $18.99 or what have you. Yeah. But how many of us have had books, whether it's used books that your parents, your grandparents, or whatever you had, you didn't buy it, but you read it and it resonated with you, and you became a lifelong fan of that author, and you ended up buying more books after that.
And that's true. And the thing is, if your book is in Ollie's, you already took the loss for that return. Like it was returned back to the publisher or whatever, or happened that it was sold off to Ollie's. So you already took the hit for whatever loss was coming. You weren't going to get the money from that
Yeah.
sale.
And I mean, and that's the other thing, and that's the thing that pisses me off with the conversation, like the agreement between publishers and bookstores is, if a book is returned, it's not really returned. There are literally bookstores that if they do not want that book, they don't return it to the publisher. They destroy the book. They will destroy the book and throw it away. They will mark it. That's why, like, if you go to like bargain bins or whatever like that, a lot of the books that you see, it'll have like a permanent marker, like slashed on the front, or
Yeah,
because
or
that's
like a
their way
slash
of,
in the cover. Like I
yeah,
had a coffee table book,
yeah,
and it's funny because my boss and I bought the same coffee table book from Ollie's, and it had like we took the regular cover off because there was slashes across the cover.
exactly. And if it's paperback, what they'll do is they'll take the front cover and rip it. They don't send it back to the publisher, and the author still took a loss for that. Because like when you get your royalty statement, there's something called, like, reserve. There are reserves held against you. Your publisher will be like, these are the amount of copies that we're going to hold against you, and that is the returns and all that stuff like that, whether the book was damaged through like shipping, or the book was the book just didn't sell, or that, because some books just have shelf life. If your book doesn't sell in like 2 to 3 months, that's it, and then they mark it up, do whatever, and then they don't send it back to the publisher. And that's how those types of books end up in bargain bins. But even though it ends up in bargain bins, you're gonna find a reader that just randomly is at Ollie's or what have you. They're doing cruising, and they pick up your book, even though you don't earn money on that book. They pick up that book, they read that book, and anything that you publish after that, they are going to be the ones that buy that book next when it is at full price. I don't know why they destroy it. And that's why I don't like the agreement between publishers and like bookstores like Barnes and Noble. I know like a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
I saw someone talking about, like, they were talking about how like bakeries, they will throw away good food at the end of the day, and people will get fired if they're seen eating perfectly good food or even donating it to homeless people, because it's considered stealing, even though like the bakery is throwing it away. And so people started talking about how that's the same thing that happens to bookstores. Once a bookstore no longer wants that book, they will destroy the book, or they will throw the book away. Sometimes that book just ends up in bargain bins.
Yeah, I
And
know somebody who worked at Barnes and Noble was telling me that they don't have authors sign books unless it's a very popular book, because if the author signs the book and it's just sitting on the shelf and it doesn't sell, when they go to return to them to the publisher won't they refuse to accept them, and then they just have to go destroy a book.
yeah, and it's frustrating because it's a waste of a good, because the other thing that actually pisses me off, and this is the larger issue as an educator, is, imagine for a second the books that they are marking up, they're ripping the covers off. Imagine if that book ended up in the hands of a disadvantaged child. You already took the loss as the author because they're holding it against your reserves. That book could have ended up with a child, but it's in Ollie's at a discount, and you already took the loss. They don't think like that. They don't think like that. Imagine if kids had those quote unquote damaged, useless books that bookstores have decided aren't worth it anymore, and throwing them away instead of just donating them to the library, or donating them to schools, donating them to homeless shelters, women's centers, domestic violence centers, they're right there. And the best part about it is that the publisher already refunded that bookstore's money for that book that they destroyed and threw away. Why can't you send it to someone who is in need? That's why it's like, it's really hard to just process traditional publishing sometimes, because I just don't understand like the waste instead of seeing value in something. Like, now I'm getting like a little bit emotional, but it's to constantly like work with children who are in need of books, but their parents can't afford it. It's just, and books are just ending up in places, and the author is taking the hit and all that stuff like that. If the book is already paid for because the author's paying for it, why can't it just be donated? I don't understand. Why can't you turn all those books into a class set for a classroom, and then the teachers will have a book for everybody to do like guided reading or a book study or a community set. Like, it boggles my mind how just that. I feel like that's just one of the reasons why I just don't think that traditional publishing is for me, because you constantly see the loss in something that really could have been valuable to someone else.
Yeah, and they kind of fearmonger authors into thinking the same way too, because I know it comes up every so often where there are authors who are like, you shouldn't donate ARCs. And I'm like, well, I will continue to donate these ARCs that I'm finished with to people who need them, whether it's putting it in the little free library, whether it's donating it to my cousin's wife who runs a school and works with various children. So she's always giving away books to kids. I would rather somebody be able to read it and enjoy it versus me throwing it in the trash when I'm done.
And that's the thing. That's why I kind of like the little libraries, like the little libraries that they have like in the neighborhood where people like will donate stuff. That's cute. That's cute. I feel like books will always, like, even though traditional publishing and like bookstores and stuff like that will treat books as if they have like an expiration date, a shelf life, there are so many books that I got put onto, so many authors I got put onto as a child, because I ended up with a bargain book or with a used copy, and now I buy everything that they put out, or I bought all the things that they had already put out. And I feel like, even though it is important to have that business mindset when you need to have that business mindset, it's also important that if you're already taking the hit, you're not going to see a sale of that book. Why not give it to people who can see that value?
Yeah, the thing with the donating ARCs is that some authors believe that if somebody gets the donated ARC, that's a loss of sales to them. The ARC wasn't a sale, though. The ARC was not a guaranteed sale at all.
I think the other thing is, because like ARCs are considered like it's a very exclusive thing by passing ARCs along. Like, sometimes the story will change from the ARC to the final copy. And so people, if they do not like a story, it could be based on the fact that, like, I'll say this much, like, because the ARC was very, very messed up for Poisons, the ending, whole scenes, all of that, a lot of that stuff changed. So if somebody ever picks up like, a digital ARC or a paperback ARC of Poisons, a lot of it is going to be completely different from the final copy. And people feel like, oh, well, I don't want people to judge me based on like an unedited copy. But the thing about it is like, you can't.
I will say you're one of the more rare examples, though, of somebody who's changed that significantly, because there's been many times where I've been reading the ARC alongside listen to the finished thing, and aside from like some word changes here and there, sentences, it's roughly the same.
but I also think that, like, what was I gonna say? What was I gonna say about arcs? Oh, so reviews, right? I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to reviews, whether it's the book is published or it's an arc, you cannot control how people perceive your book. You can't control how people perceive your book, and it gets to the point where, like, I know a lot of people try to control so many factors surrounding their book, whether it's the arc or it's finally published, and you just can't do that. You are going to eat yourself up from the inside out if you are constantly worried about what people are saying about your book. And I've learned that it is a lot easier to just let stuff go. Now, it's one thing if, like, your book is like getting like tore the fuck up. And like, I know a lot of people like to do them little review bombs and all that stuff like that. Like, I get that. I got that. But I do feel like a lot of authors, they take it to heart, and it really should be the publisher's job to protect them, and not the author to do XYZ. Because you gonna tear up your mental health, you're gonna tear up your emotional health, you're gonna tear everything up worried about what folks are saying. And like, once the book is out there, baby, you can't change it. It's done. It's done. It's over with. And I will say this much, is that some people will read a book even if it has a whole bunch of negative reviews. They do it all. Listen, there's white folk out here that write erotica about doors and pillows, and folks still pick up the book and read it. It's true. Don't look off to the side.
There's also
You
white
already
women.
know.
There's also white women, like educators and librarians, who pick up a bunch of kid lit, and every single time they find a problem with the ones by non-white authors, but they still consistently read them all the time.
Hate it. Especially when it's like, well, why didn't they go to an adult? Girl, like, are you serious right now?
And my thing is, if you put your review out there for the public on Goodreads, and I feel it's racist, I will put that on blast. I will take my little screenshot and put it on blast.
I hate that. I hate when adults go into a book and say, wow, this character is just so immature. It's like, teens are immature. Teens make bad decisions. But also, how can you as an adult say that you are an avid book reader and you cannot understand that an author has characters make stupid decisions to move the plot along? If a character does everything right, there would be no plot. If an adult steps in and solves the character's problems, y'all would say, oh, that's a useless character, or that's the point of kid lit. The kids take the center focus of the story. Like, there's nothing wrong with having like adult mentors or anything like that. Absolutely, especially when you're in the Black community, where you will always be surrounded by Black mentors. So it makes sense to have those people in there. But guess what? Black mentors, look, I'm from the South, baby. I'm from North Florida, and let me tell you, I might have mentors. They might have a little black and mild, perched up on their lips like a bird, and they might be sipping Hennessy, and they might give you some advice. That don't mean I'm gonna take it all the time. Sometimes you gotta make mistakes. Like, come on. I don't get it. Like, it makes like,
and people don't put the Black mentor doing any of what you just described in the book. They hate that.
Listen, and that's another thing, is I wish traditional publishing would embrace Black Southernness more. I feel like it's a lost opportunity. Because Black Southernness brings a whole different type of texture to Blackness. Not that I'm saying if you are in any other region that doesn't, you're any less Black, but I do feel like Southern Blackness is just its own type of.
That's like something that they would definitely do in Black Caribbean as well. They are also like that.
you know, and and
It resonates with a lot of people.
like a lot of people were like, just some things is like, especially it's like, even though like Black adults are important in stories, right? Sometimes it is important to just recognize that like there, I guess there is a misconception that adults in a child's life will be a valuable asset to that child, when as an educator all I ever saw was adults making bad decisions that affected children. So why not pick up a book where a child is making those decisions? Like in because that's what they were already doing. I had children who were in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. They were the ones that did the homework for the kids. They were the ones that bathed the kids. They were the ones that cooked the kids. They were the ones that made sure everybody got dressed. They were the ones that made sure that they ended up in bed, got the kids up, did everything. That's just some kids' experiences. Some adults just, they're not good for children. So this expectation that we should constantly write stories where it's like the child constantly relies on adult, that's not everybody's lived experience. Sometimes adults make it worse.
And I
Sometimes
think
adults
too,
make
we
it
should be able
worse.
to call that out in books, because there's been a couple of times I've read some books by some bestsellers where the adults weren't making good decisions, but also we were just supposed to ignore the harm in which the adult decisions were causing the kids, and I didn't understand that either.
I mean, and it's definitely one of those things where it's like, I feel like a lot of people will lose the value of a reading experience if they're constantly trying to find themselves in a character and trying to compare, well, that's not my lived experience. Well, the author didn't have your lived experience, or that's not what we're trying to do. I'm not trying to match you. I'm not trying to match you. I'm not trying to go blow for blow. But everyone interprets their own identity differently. So why are we constantly trying to see exactness? Why are we trying to see exactness when so many different things come into play? Some people come from two-parent homes. Some people come from one-parent homes. Some people weren't even raised by their parents. They were raised by an aunt. They were raised by an uncle. They were raised by a cousin. They were raised by grandparents. You might have lived in South Florida. South Florida is very different from North Florida. You might have lived in upstate New York. Upstate New York is very, very different from New York City. You might live in the Midwest of Kansas. Kansas is very, very different from what? Like Iowa? Is Iowa in the Midwest? Somebody correct me.
Iowa's like on the cusp between like the North and the Midwest, I'd say. It depends on what part you're in.
I guess so. But it's just like everyone, and then also you have language, right? Like it's very frustrating to see like traditional publishing treat AAVE like it's just so illiterate, it's just so this, is just so that. But you want to use lit is lit, kid is lit, all these little yes, that ate crumbs and all that, my edges are gone. And Rebecca, your edges, you didn't have edges. You didn't have, like, they will use, and then it's also this rebranding that like Gen Z internet slang is AAVE is Gen Z internet slang. Like it's just but if you put it in the book, then everyone wants to like just punch down on it. So it's kiki,
yeah.
It's giggle, and it's it's cute to put it on the internet, but when people actually live it, breathe it, say it, now we ignorant, and we're this and we're that.
It's interesting because of you see the way AAVE is treated, but then like, and at the same time in publishing, they kind of use Jamaican patois as sprinkling to make the book seem like extra exotic. But the problem is those readers read them books and they're like, that's not how you spell this. Granted, like there's different spellings for different words, and there's like various spellings you can have for one word. They're like, that's not the context in which this should be used. And a lot of times the people who are sprinkling them in their books, they haven't lived in Jamaica since they were like 5.
I mean,
so and they're not used to using that language all the time either.
And language also changes, or like you might have one thing that is culturally universal, but it's different things. Like for instance, when like we have honey drippers, and honey drippers is just like juice in either a red cup or a styrofoam cup, and it's frozen. But even though we call it honey drippers in North Florida or Jacksonville, in Alabama and Mississippi up north, like frozen cup juice cups is like different, something completely different.
We call those ices.
Yeah. So I just feel like what's the word I'm looking for? Like Black culture, like there are some universal experiences, like, like I'm sure everybody's had a parent say, do you have McDonald's money? If we get in this grocery store, you better not say a damn thing. Like stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? But even then, like there's still like variations, and that doesn't make it any less authentic. And I feel like when you go into a book expecting that Black experience to be the same as your Black experience, you're doing a disservice to yourself, instead of seeing, wow, this is how Black folk live on this side of the world, or this is how Black folk live in this state, or what have you. Yeah, I get triggered.
That's why we need more regional representation as well, which is something I've been talking about a lot this year, because publishing is like mainly in New York. They tend to pick up a lot of books from the New York area and ignore all the other areas of the country.
Yeah. The North and the West they get a lot of rep. And that's why I'm just like,
not even really the North. They just mostly concentrated in New York, which is its own thing.
Yeah. I know that, like, as a Southern author, I want to see more Southern books. I want to see more Southern books, because when I tell you that Black kids in the South are hungry, they're hungry because they're tired of reading about other kids in other parts of the country, because we just move different in the South. We just move different. And, and then also it's just like we need more books about children who are in lower class families. There's just a lot of books where the characters are from the suburbs, or they're upper class or middle class or what have you, and there's nothing wrong with those stories, but that's just not everyone's experience. And we need more books of children who live in the hood, who live in the country, who live in XYZ, having those adventures too.
As I always say, the majority of Black people in the U.S., it's a proven fact, live down south.
Yeah,
that's just where the majority are concentrated.
And that's the thing, and that's the frustrating thing. And it gets me even more that people just like generalize the South. Like how we move in Florida is very different from the Carolinas, is very different from Georgia, is very different from Alabama, Mississippi, New Orleans. Like I got family, I got blood in New Orleans. And baby, love my NOLA family. Love y'all. But they move different. They move different. I've been I'll never forget, I got invited to a all black biker gang meetup that my aunt was she was in an all-female black gang, black motorcycle gang, and it was fun till that bounce music started, and then it was cheeks all over the place, and I was against the wall just clutching my little chest like, what is happening? And it was just cheeks, just a wave of oscillating cheeks, girl. And like it was like, I love y'all, but I was just like, wow, that's a lot. There's a lot happening in this little area right here. But yeah, love y'all, NOLA.
And even North Florida is very different than South Florida.
Oh yes, and there's a saying in Florida. that like the further north you go, the more southern it gets. It's very, very different. Very, very different. And even like northeast Florida, where I'm at, is very different from northwest Florida, which would be like near near Alabama. Them motherfuckers are different. That side of the state, they move different. And then also the folk that are, and I know like there is like a large concentration of like Latinx people like in Miami. However, there's country folk in South Florida too. There's country folk that like culturally it's one thing, but like there's still Southerners in South Florida. So, but it's very different. The middle part is where a lot of the snowbirds come, and they're just ruining everything. So please stop sending your snowbirds here. We appreciate it. We'd appreciate it because they tear stuff up. They weren't ready for them 2 hurricanes back to back. They thought Florida was cute, and then them 2 hurricanes came. And baby, they was fleeing like the Dickens. And
it's
now
funny, but it's not, because like around the same time when the hurricanes were happening, I was taking my aunt out grocery shopping like I do every month, and some white man was like, "Oh my gosh, it's starting to get cold here. Like this is why I need to move to Florida." And she's like, "You want to move to Florida with all them hurricanes?"
They think it's different. And it was so funny because it's like when it comes to hurricanes, like Floridians, like born and raised or Floridians, I'm 5th generation, like born and raised Floridians, we just hunker down. We it's very, very rare that we will evacuate depending on the situation. I have yet to evacuate. And so it was really interesting to see everybody flee. And you could tell like, oh, okay, they're not from Florida, because they were getting the hell up out of Dodge, and everybody else that stayed behind, they're just from Florida. And you know, even if the hurricane got really bad, I can't leave Florida anyway. I live only a couple of minutes from my grandfather. My grandfather is over 80 years old. If he's not leaving, I can't leave, because I have to get to him, or he has to be able to get to me. So I was going to stay regardless. And old heads in Florida, they don't move. So I got to stay where I am anyway. So I was, you know, if something had happened, I guess I'll get on my little bed and we can float down to his apartment complex.
We'll float down.
And we'll take it from there. But I can't leave.
See, luckily, most of my family is not from the part of the Caribbean that really gets hit with hurricanes, although one set has another issue to deal with in that if they get any bad rain, they're below sea level. Like, bad rain will flood them out. So they just be praying for good weather all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, like, in Florida is just, I think the bigger misconception is that Florida is always sunny. Florida is almost always raining. It rains almost all the time. Like it can, and then also it can be cold in like in the morning, and then it will be 100 degrees in the afternoon. It's very, very whiplashy. It's very, very Gemini. I feel like there's no consistency, and I feel like a lot of people don't know how to live in Florida, and that's why. And it's sad because they raise up the prices for the houses. People are getting like. People that have lived in Florida for generations are getting priced out of their own areas because like snowbirds are coming thinking they can take it, and they can't. They can't take it. And it's sad. It was my goal to set more stories in Florida, because I feel like there's not enough stories in Florida. I don't know about that now. Like I said, I'm self-publishing a werewolf smut book in 2025. So keep an eye out for that. And I just kind of want to write some werewolf smut, and just, you know, that's what traditional publishing has drove me to.
I mean, we do need good paranormal stuff, though, because the paranormal romance that's being published in trad right now is not the same paranormal from before.
I mean, like, I just feel like I'm not trying to discount like folks in their like writing.
They only want the rom-com, that stuff that right now in trad that feels more like just a contemporary romance, but everybody so happens to have magic.
But see, I guess my thing about it is like, if you're going to sell like romance or steam or spice or hot sauce, tobacco, however you want to sell it to me, like I've been disappointed by these sex scenes. I've been disappointed by because people be like, girl, chapter 16, that's the chapter, and then I get to it, and it's about as just plain as a slice of Wonder Bread. How you gonna hype up something to me, and
You were
it
lucky
don't
that it was
even
in chapter
have,
16, because lately it being like chapter 50.
and that's the other, like if you're going to say something is steamy, something is spicy, so I have high expectations. Maybe I'm a slut, I don't know, but I have a high expectations. In too many books, especially some of these white romance books, too many of these damn books, they not doing it for me. They're not, it's not enough for me. Like I feel like it's either you go hard or you go home, and too many people are like, you need to, these books are way too expensive. I expect a lot for how expensive these damn books are. I have expectations. I need
That's
like
why I like getting the ebook edition where I can look up certain words. Oh, it doesn't have that in it. I guess it's not.
Exactly. And if I see the words like velvet wrapped steel, or if I see like her flower lips, her petals, I'm shutting the book. I'm shutting the book. I'm shutting it. I'm sorry. If you don't say the words that I don't want to hear, that like back in the day, it made sense. It made sense why they'll be like, oh, his love log entered her cave. Like I got that. But we're in 2020. We're in 2024 now. I don't want to hear about no love logs. I don't want to hear about her flower petals. I don't want to hear about her orchard, her orchard.
Look, if I saw love log in a book, I would end up closing the book and I'm done from there. And I've done that with some books, like where like we got to the scene and there was just some really questionable like euphemisms. I'm like, okay, I'm done.
No, I don't know. It's just like we've kind of reached a point where even music is more explicit. So it's just like, why can't you just say the words you need to say? Why can't you still say the word? I don't want to hear his spearhead stabbed her. I don't want to hear that stuff. Just get to the point. Get to the point. Okay? I don't like that. Just get to the point. Say what you need to say.
The headboard bang against the wall.
Like I just need people to just go for it. Because I'm picking up these books that are like these best-selling books, and I'm like reading these sex scenes, trying to figure like, okay, like what's the fuss all about? And it's just like, it's nothing. It's nothing. As I said before, maybe like, is that exactly? Are you grown or not? Like, are you grown or not?
Now we're gonna have like an inappropriate affair and then not get any of it on page.
No, exactly. And it's like, okay, if your book is also gonna have like a fade to black, fine. I respect that. Like, I respect those fade to blacks. My issue is with the books where people are hyping up scenes and like girl, like he was turning her every which way but loose. He flipped her around and did a double backhand triple swing twist. And I'm like, okay, so I'm reading everything. I get to the chapter. And all they did was kiss and lay down in the bed. And then it was love logs in moist caves.
Not moist caves.
But I'm just saying, like, I just expect more. I expect more. Especially these books that y'all are like that are selling more than like the Bible. I'm like, come on now. Like y'all, like I need a little bit more. Like people were saying like, oh, fourth lane, or no, Iron Line.
I actually love that when people say, oh, I don't read adult fantasy because it's too vulgar and I'm not ready for all that stuff. I'm like, have you read an adult fantasy? Most of it does not have that.
It doesn't. It really doesn't. Like
Most of
somebody
it is fade to black, and the few that do claim they have that other stuff, you read the sex scenes and start laughing.
But it's like I think it was like an Iron Frame. Like there was a sex scene that everybody kept hyping up. I think it was like about a throne or something. And I was just like, but then I was talking to somebody and they were telling me what it was about, and I was like, that doesn't sound appealing, actually. That really doesn't sound appealing. So, you know, I'm just saying, like, for anybody that like writes like adult romance, let's just be grown about it. And books are too expensive to not be grown. Books are way too expensive to not be grown. And what does it say? I assume it's very young women hyping up a lot of these books because it's super spicy to them. No, yeah, well, I'll say this much. It could be that. Or it could just be people just have really vanilla lives and they tell it on themselves. Because like with 50 Shades
I
of
don't be
Grey,
personally seeing the super young women as much. And like I understand like as when you're young and you read certain stuff and like it reads differently, because I've definitely gone back and read some stuff I thought was spicy from my teen years that was in a way I'm like, well, actually, no, people are more vulgar than that now.
yeah. But like with 50 Shades of Grey, like that book was so boring. Like it really was. But you would have thought that E.L. James was putting her foot in it. You would have thought that 50 Shades of Grey was just like a good like sweet potato pie. Like just the bees. You would have thought.
When I read that tampon scene, I'm like, this is what's turning you on? Okay.
But then also it was like she kept saying like my goddess, my inner goddess. I'm like, girl, what goddess? What inner goddess? And I don't know.
Especially that was the era when people on our school bus were reading hood books out loud to the group.
Now see, I grew up on. Let me find him. Because I don't know how old some people are in the comments. But like I grew up on Eric Jerome Dickey. And I also, child, don't even get us started with Zane. There is one. Was it just him? I think it was just him. As a matter of fact, we need more Black male romance authors because Eric Jerome Dickey, he cornered the market. Like his romance is like, I can't believe he's gone actually, because like it's a real shame. Like we need more Black men in various genres because I like the perspective that they add, and they're not afraid to.
The problem is like even when men try to get into romance, people want them to like kind of write from the woman's perspective, and I'm like, you're just not going to get the woman's perspective.
Yeah, we want the male perspective. We want the male perspective because I do feel like a lot of fiction tends to be like girl and female oriented, and we need more men in those spaces because I want to know the man. I want to know the man perspective, but then also not just me, but like we have to also understand that not everything is meant for us, and it's really meant for male readers too. So we can't always get offended by stuff that male authors write if we weren't at the forefront of that book. Because let me be clear, there are lots of books that sexually objectify men, that do all sorts of things that men might find offensive. We don't hear them say anything. I can't believe y'all got me on this live stream defending men. I'm mad now. But
The book community will do that to you, though. Have you defended men? What do you
like? But I'm just saying, no. I'm just. I need. I need more. We need more diversity because we're losing. We're losing people, and I feel like the other thing is, especially about the book community, is like when we think about like the book community as a whole, when we think about our audience, I feel like a lot of people are focusing on the existing book community, and that is important, but there's only so many of us, and your real goal is to appeal to people that aren't in the book community. The book community is so closed knit that your book can only travel so far within like a closed circuit, and you have to be willing to actually reach beyond the book community to get your book out there. And that's why there's that importance of like bargain bins and libraries and pharmacies and grocery stores and all of these other places that sell books, because your book is reaching people who do not go to the bookstore. They don't, they don't go to the bookstore dressed up so that they can get a cup of coffee and walk around. They don't do that. It's all about convenience and accessibility. If I'm waiting in line to check out my stuff and I see a book and it's cheap, I can pick up that book and just add it to my purchase and call it a day. And call it a day. So, but I do think that we need more Black men. And we even need younger Black men who want to write. And those stories are extremely valuable, because when we have conversations about men and boys, like in books, like Black boys and men are always left out of the conversation. When we talk about, I think there was like this article that came out like a few days ago or something like that, where they were like, they were talking about how boys are being left behind when it comes to these books that are being published. And there were several Black male authors that I really respect. They were talking about how when we have these conversations about boys are being left behind, what about Black boys? I absolutely concur. What about Black boys? What about them? Because I feel like they're getting left out, and there tends to be an expectation that when there is Black representation, Black boy representation, Black men representation in books, there is this expectation that they need to be little angels, that they need
2 times a week in therapy.
Like, and my thing about it is like, I didn't grow up around that. I grew up around hood niggas. I'm sorry. Fuck it. I grew up around hood. And so it's like, I want to see that. And that was something that I fought for in The Poisons We Drink, because they wanted me to cut like several Black male characters. And I said, hell no. I said no. That's why, and that's the other thing is like, we need that type of representation. They are flawed. They do have a soft side, but they have a hard side too. And we have to accept that, because if Black boys constantly see themselves being written a specific way, then that messes with their body their body image, their self-esteem, and it's already hard for them. Like, why can't you just write them being human and not perfect? Why can't you? So female characters are allowed to be flawed and hard and soft and all that stuff like that. But when it comes to Black boy characters, they have to be a specific way. That does not matter to me, especially in a society where you have Black boys who are soft, who are quote unquote kind, who are quote unquote non-threatening, and they still get murdered. They still get targeted. They still get attacked. They doing everything right, and they still they still got a target on their back.
And I think that's why we should also be careful of the language we use. Like, let me just make this clear that the way a lot of people like to follow the same marketing white authors do, that doesn't apply to us as Black authors. It really does not. And sometimes it can even alienate your audience. But like I see a lot of like the cinnamon roll and the stuff like that people use. Okay, but like you're also saying, okay, well, we need perfect Black boys. Like they have to be super sweet. They have to be this specific way. And we just see that over and over and over again. And I'm like, well, where are the Black boys who are just allowed to be regular?
And I feel like that's key. And I think that that's something that people really need to tap into and think about, because like, why are they expected to be that way? I think we really need to get to the point where why are we in 2024 and there is this expectation that Black men and boys have to move a certain way when they are a demographic that is largely unrepresented and have very few representatives in traditional publishing anyway. And that's the thing. You like when Lee and Low, or Low and Lee, or Lee, Low and Stitch, whatever that damn survey people, every year they come out with a little diversity thing and they do like a breakdown of, okay, well, this demographic in traditional publishing. Like,
also, I don't know if you've ever seen their books. Their books are expensive. Like
I didn't even know they published books until
they do. They have their own. I don't know if it's an imprint or if it's like their own independent publisher. I don't want to get mixed up, but they do put out books. And the last time I saw one of their middle grade books, they was trying to sell that thing for like $25.
I didn't know that. Now, see, I like their little surveys what I wish they did differently with the surveys is like, they'll be like, okay, well, here's the pie. This amount of people are female. This amount of people are male. This amount of people are non-binary or whatever. And then here are the little ethnicities and races and stuff like that. But I feel like stuff gets lost in the translation, because like we see, like, it might say like, oh, well, there's 8% of Black people in traditional publishing, and people could be like, oh, well, that's not a bad number. But my question is, well, how many are men and how many are women?
And how many are biracial? So they're getting also counted in the white wheel as well.
Yes. And I feel like there's not a lot of Black male people at the table in traditional publishing. So you have women of all ethnicities putting their hands in the type of representation that is being put out into the world in regards to Black boys and men. And that's the issue. That's the T. You have too, and then also a lot of some authors will write Black boys or men, in a way that's quote unquote non-threatening, not because they agree with it, but because they might have gotten an edit letter from their editor, or they might have gotten an edit letter from their agent saying, well, maybe we should tweak this, or maybe we should tweak that. So maybe in the beginning he was this way, but once enough non-Black hands touch stuff, he might have not been that way in the end. And you've kind of lost your way in the translation, because you're trying to satisfy an agent, you're trying to satisfy an editor, you're trying to satisfy, acquisitions, you're trying to satisfy people, and you've lost the plot as a result. And I will say, there are a lot of agents and there are a lot of editors who that talk reckless in the editing and the revising process. These edit letters, they talk reckless. They talk, as we like to say in the South, they talk slick, out the side of your mouth slick. And when you enter those types of situations in traditional publishing, where it's like, your editor or your agent is what's standing between you and your book going out on submission, or your editor is what's standing between you and your book getting into copy edits so that you can get that next part of your advance or what have you, now you're in a bind. Because now you have to decide, am I going to fight this and be seen as a problem because I want to stay authentic, or am I just going to give in so I can get to the next hoop to jump through? And a lot of Black authors, a lot of BIPOC authors are often faced with that issue of, like, I have someone standing in between me and what I want. They're not going to give me what I want unless I do what they want. And that compromises the authenticity and the integrity of your identity in the book.
And sometimes that compromise can blow up in your face.
It especially once it gets to the audience that you say your book is for,
yeah,
and they're like, I can't do this. And so then it's not the agent that gets the backlash. It's not the editors that get the backlash, the copy editors, the proofreaders, nobody gets the backlash except the author. And I think that it is something, it's a misconception that is not advertised loudly. Like, even though people are like, the only thing that the author has in control is their story and the characters in the book. And let me tell you, that is not always the case. That's not always the case.
Somebody say the other day, they're like, one thing you need to know as an author when you're getting into traditional publishing is you're going to have to fight the publisher. Be expected to fight the publisher. And a lot of people aren't ready to fight the publisher.
And I mean, like, if you want a career in traditional publishing, there is this expectation that you got to be a good little Negro. You got to be a good little Negro. Don't rock the boat. Don't do this. And that's how in a lot of agents will push that onto Black authors, and they follow their agents. They follow what their agents say.
Some of y'all in the comments are mentioning imprints, and I just want to stop there just to make it clear. They're giving Black people imprints. You mentioned Kwame, you mentioned Jason. Charlemagne has one too. They are not usually the main ones doing the editing, though, and the acquisitions when they give them these imprints. It's often people who aren't even Black. That's a discussion we're not having. That people are getting imprints so that these publishers can be like, oh, look, we care about diversity. And then you look at the people who are doing the acquisitions for the imprints, and they usually don't have their own separate editor. It's an editor who already works for the publisher, working on multiple imprints. And they're just like, well, we can just push the Black books off to this imprint.
And that's the other thing is like, even though it is good that traditional publishing is giving, imprints to Black folk in traditional publishing so that it's representative, how can I put this?
It's like a catch-22 because they're not putting the attention that needs to be put into an imprint to have it run successfully and make an impact.
Especially if they're going to put like white editors or non-Black editors like in a position where they're the ones that are getting emailed the manuscripts, and they're the ones that make the decision, am I going to take this to the acquisitions table so that XYZ can see it and make a decision. So they're still a gatekeeper in a BIPOC imprint. That's blocking the way. There's a lot of books that die, trying to make their way into a BIPOC imprint because there's still a non-Black editor that's stopping the process. And it's definitely one of those things. That might not be the case for all imprints, but it's something to be considered. A perfect example would be Amistad. Amistad, the historic, it's one of the oldest Black imprints in the United States. The head of their imprint is white people. The head of their imprint is white people. They're the ones that make the make the decisions about Black books. Go figure. And they're one of the oldest Black imprints in the United States in traditional publishing, and they are managed by white people.
Yeah, like I will just say that these imprints, like a lot of these Black imprints, they're not being run the same way Black imprints were previously.
No, but I think a lot of that has to do with the structure of traditional publishing is changing. The structure of traditional publishing is changing because, like, if you notice, they started shifting towards, okay, let's hire all the Negroes. And now that 2020 is done and 2021 is done and 2022 is done, now they're just firing all the Negroes. Every few months, some Black person that was put in a position of power in traditional publishing that is Black, they're leaving or they're getting laid off. And we finding out the same day that they find it out. And it's interesting to see how they're also closing imprints. They're closing lots of imprints. They're consolidating imprints. They are laying off lots of different editors, and the structure of it is changing. And I'm curious to see where Black folk will play out in all of this.
Especially because for a while there, people were toting like, oh, if we just get these people at the imprints for us, like if we just put these people in the editor position, that's going to solve the diversity issues. But then there's a whole other issue of they put people in charge sometimes who are just there to fulfill like the white needs. Like they put people who think like the white gatekeepers in charge in certain positions. So the books that they're acquiring, they want to make sure they fit into a certain box. And I'm saying that because I've had conversations with some of these Black editors where they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even look at like what you were saying that way until you pointed it out.
I think the other thing is that they're putting like Black editors in place, but they're the only ones at the table that is Black. And when it comes to second reads, like when I first like started like going on sub, and I had to find out that the editor does not get that kind of say, and they have to pass on your manuscript to someone else, and that person, and sometimes it's not even just one person, sometimes it's 2-3 people, how many ever people, and everybody has to be in agreement that, okay, we're going to take this book to acquisitions. So then you sit down at an acquisitions table and everybody is white. And now if everybody has to say yes, or it's a no. So even though your editor might be Black, might be BIPOC, might be Asian, whatever, they still have to go to other people. Now there are editors who are like senior editors, and they might have more pull and more say, but like the amount of time the amount of times BIPOC authors have sent off a manuscript to someone that is of their, identity, and are told, I loved it, but my colleagues didn't. And it ends there. So still, even if that editor loved it, if their colleagues didn't love it, it's the end of the discussion. And most of the time, their colleagues and the people that are sitting at the acquisition table are white. But also, the other thing that is held against BIPOC authors, and more specifically Black authors, is that when they're sitting at the acquisition table talking about your book will almost always be compared to a white book. And if that white book's not doing good, you'll be held, you get impacted by that. And if the white book is doing good, you still might get impacted by that, because they might be like, well, we already have a book like that. Or it could be, oh, this book isn't selling well, so we don't want the book. And so a lot of our success is measured by the success or the failures of white authors. And that's something to be said.
And just because the editor is BIPOC doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at acquiring Black books either, because something I've noticed is that quite a few Black books, and I say Black in quotation marks because they weren't written by Black people, have been acquisitions that came from a BIPOC editor.
I mean, it says something. It definitely says something. I just feel like there's too many hoops to jump through. And then the more insulting part is if a publisher does give you a book deal and you get the offer, and the offer is pretty much pennies, that is a whole other ball of wax. And I know people are like, oh, well, publishers pay based on the value of the book, or they come up with all types of excuses. But you're telling me that you have white authors who will literally be like, she's ice, he's fire, they're forbidden lovers, and get a 7-figure deal. You come up with something that is unique and different, and you only getting what, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000.
And that's split across multiple books. And now we're seeing people being let out of their contract after book 1 doesn't really do well in sales. And that's with a lack of publisher promotion. I've seen people get let out of their contracts a lot recently, or just have to break their contract because things were so bad at their publisher, like, and they were getting paid peanuts for the book anyway. They might as well just leave for their mental well-being. And then I've seen people, like, their first book came out in print, their next book is digital only.
But the thing about it is like, how am I going to say this? I think so what I'm noticing is, and I've read books for, everybody's read books for a long time, but I've noticed that the responsibilities of the publishers are changing. And what I mean by that is, when I was growing up, like, a lot of books, like, publishers pushed a lot of books harder. Publishers really, like, put the work in for a lot of books. But then also there was a clear midlist. There was a clear midlist in traditional publishing. You had your A list or your top list or whatever, and then you had your mid list. I've noticed that the middle list is being squeezed out. It's either you're going to be a bestseller or you're nothing. And even if the publisher doesn't put the marketing, the resources, all that stuff like that, even if they don't do that, they still expect a book to do well. And I've noticed that a lot. Like, and it doesn't even matter the size of the advance. I've seen books that they got like mid 6 figures, high 6 figures, 7-figure deals, and the publisher did bare minimum on those books, and those books released not with a bang, but with the whimper.
Yeah, and some of those books were originally, like, supposed to be frontlist, because I've seen many times where the publisher flat out says, in the key selling points, in the marketing plan, this is supposed to be a frontlist book. We're going to be doing this, this, and this, and this. And then they change course and it doesn't happen.
And you can only do so much if you put the book on Instagram. If you put the book on Instagram, like, one post, like, publishers, and now, like, a lot of people have publishers, well, they'll have like these little author, like, helpful things. And, like, like Penguin Random House and a lot of other publishers, they'll have like a little section where it's like, here's resources for authors. And a lot of the resources is, here's how to push yourself on social media. Here's how to extend your reach on social media. Here's how to market yourself. Here's how to do this. Here's how to do that. And it's like, gone are the days where it's like, you wrote the book, you edited the book, you did what you were supposed to do the book. Now it's the publisher's part.
Well, I would argue for Black people, that was never a thing. And that's something you need to remember as well. That was never for us. Like, the reason we have people who are even Black bestsellers right now is because the Black bestsellers of the past, who people don't like to give credit to, saw that their publisher was not pushing their book, and they went out and did it themselves in their community.
I feel like the even the most basic responsibilities have been scaled back. And it's one of those things where it's just like, publishers have already washed their hands of a book success. And so if a publisher has already checked out, you can clearly see it in what they do. You can clearly see it in what they do. And if you have even a smaller book advance, or if your book isn't considered quote unquote important, like, to the publisher, you can clearly see when a publisher has just checked out, and it's sad. It's extremely sad.
It is.
And it's frustrating. And so you have authors who are pouring their own money into like doing their own marketing, trying to do their own publicity, trying to do all this stuff like that, because publishers have just scaled back more and more and more. And it gets to the point where y'all not are even fighting to get books in bookstores.
They're not doing that. They're putting the ARC out a month before, or sometimes not even a month, sometimes a few weeks before the book is set to release. That's when they're sending ARCs to readers. They're not giving like a word of mouth a chance either.
They're also rejecting people from ARCs. Like, you're not giving out the ARCs at all.
Yeah, I've had to fight many a publisher on that.
It's self-sabotage. It's just sabotage. Not even it's just sabotage. Just straight up sabotage. It is frustrating. And it's even more frustrating to see it happen to Black authors. It's even more frustrating to see it happen because publishers will not hesitate to say, we have a Black book this season. And then that's the last time you hear about that book.
At the beginning of the season either. A lot of what I'm noticing for a lot of Black books is they'll put it on social once, and that day is release day. That's it.
Or they're not even trying to pitch authors to these book festivals, these book conventions, they're libraries, podcasts. They're not even trying. And that's the other sad part, because there are specific book festivals and conventions and events and podcasts and channels and that focus specifically on BIPOC books. And they're not, or even Black books, and they're not even reaching out to them. And you want me to believe that a Black podcast or a Black owned what have you told you no?
And I went to a Black book festival recently, and I have a couple of Black author friends who are in the area, and I'm just like, how comes they didn't ask you as a local to be a part of this? Like, they flew in all these other people to be like a part of it, but there's local people who weren't asked at all.
And that's a whole other ball of wax. Like, there have been several Florida book festivals and stuff like that, like, and I ain't been to nary one. And it is sad because I love being Floridian. That's like, and I love my state very dearly and very deeply, and I want my books to get out there, especially since right now we're combating like Florida book bans. And my book, even though it's not banned, it would be, if it were in a classroom, it would be banned. And so to reach kids in a different way would be great. But I just realized that, publishers have scaled back a lot. And it's like, at that point, what are you for? What is your purpose? What is your goal? What is your function? And like, I know a lot of people, they'll be like, well, I can't afford to do be, an indie published author or self-published author or what have you, because it's expensive. Listen, I understand, because I'm self-publishing my little smut book. It is a smut book. And I'm paying for all this stuff out of pocket, and it's not cheap. And publishing wasn't paying me much to begin with. And I'm using money that I made from publishing to like pay for some of this stuff, but it is not cheap. And I understand it. But on the flip side, traditional publishing ain't doing much either. And that's why I say, going back to the beginning of the conversation, my philosophy is always take the money and run. Yes, Hannah. Yes, Werewolf Smut. I actually just put down payment on the cover, and I told the artist that it will not be a discreet cover. I hate them little covers where it's like, a foggy like forest, and then it'll be like temptation on it. No, it is going to be non-discreet. It is going to be slutty. It is going to be slutty. And I can't wait to show it. Yeah.
So where can people keep up with you to hear news about this upcoming book?
Well, you could go to BethanyBaptiste.com, or you could go to Story Sorcery, which is on Twitter, or you can go to actually, this is how much I'm really not on Instagram, because I already forgot my Instagram username. If you go on to BethanyBaptiste.com, you'll find my little handles, or you could go to StorySorcery.com, and there's a little link tree, and you can find all my little handles. But from henceforth, I will be self-publishing books, and they will be grown folk books. They will be grown.
And will they still be under Bethany Baptiste, or?
Yes, it will be under Bethany Baptiste. I do have a pen name called Wish a Bitch Would. I've decided that I'm not going to move forward with that title. I mean, with that pen name. And I do have another pen name, but I do feel like Bethany Baptiste is easier to find, even though I do love Wish a Bitch Would.
I love that. So I think here is the perfect time to end. We want to thank everybody who tuned in for like over 3 hours too at that. Y'all stayed unwavered, and I love the conversation that was going here. I loved how active people were in the comment section. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to Bethany for coming and spilling some tea, talking about her journey and just keeping it real. Is there any other closing comments you have?
Just the importance to be your authentic self. Be your authentic self, and don't let traditional publishing change you. Yeah, that's about the gist of it. And then also, I will be on Twitter, so like I'm gonna start a little thread. So if you have any questions or comments or a meme that you would like to share, just let me know, and that'll be greatly appreciated. Me and Augusta appreciate y'all coming, and thank you, Vina, for inviting me, and keep an eye out on my werewolf smut story, and I will be letting y'all know soon.
Coming in 2025.
Yep.
So thanks everybody who tuned in. Bye.
Bye.